Let's get started. Good evening. Tonight is June 15th, 2026. This is a study session meeting of the Minnetonka City Council, and we just decided to move the meeting in here to help accommodate both the large number of staff and the anticipated number of observers. So just as a quick before we get started, this is a study session. It's still meant to be in the structure of a study session. We don't take any comments or input from spectators, but they're all welcome to be here. And we try to keep it informal. So let's start with introductions. And tonight we're just going to do council, and then Ms. Dahman's going to take notes of what other staff members are here as well. So Paula, why don't you go ahead?
Paula Ramaley, Ward 3.
Deb Calvert, at-large, CA.
Kizzy Coakley, Ward 4.
Rebecca Shack, Mayor.
Patsy Foster Bolton, Ward 1.
Kimberly Wilburn, at large.
Amanda Maxwell, Ward 2.
All right, thank you. So just as a kind of outline for tonight, so we hope to spend about an hour on 3A, the Purgatory Park Off-Leash Dog Area Evaluation. Maybe about, I think Mike thinks an hour, but I would say an hour and a half more realistically on the CIP. And then we'll just briefly talk about July study session topics, and I've just got a little point of discussion there. So let's get going. Mike, you want to start with the Purgatory Park Off-Leash Dog Area Evaluation?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca and Council. Before we do that, just want to remind the Council you do have an addenda in front of you. And so there's 2 items for your addenda. I know you don't officially approve the agenda item, but just really want to call out to your attention with item 3A, which is related to, as the Mayor mentioned, Purgatory Park Off-Leash Dog Area Evaluation. There was public comment received after publication in the packet, so that's included in the addenda. And then the same is true for item 3B, which is preliminary 2027 through 2031 capital improvements program review. Public comment again was received after publication of the packet. So all those comments are received and published in your packet, and then are part of the agenda. So with that, if it's okay, Mayor, I'll just roll into then 3A.
Go for it.
All right, thank you. So I'll quickly just tee it up. Sitting behind me, we have 2 staff members that will primarily lead the conversation related to the Purgatory Park Off-Leash Dog Area Evaluation. Before we turn it over to Matt Kumka, who's going to start that conversation, I just do want to recognize just really the efforts of Matt Kumka, Rachel Meehan, our police captain. One of our captains will be speaking. She supervises the staff that enforce the ordinance. And so you'll hear both from Matt and from Rachel this evening just about our staff experiences. And I would just begin by saying that the staff report really kind of outlines the challenges. And as I think, Council, as I talked to you throughout the last few weeks, just really highlighting, we went into this with good intentions in terms of a plan last year, and part of coming back this evening was to report on how things have gone here the last 6-9 months regarding the off-leash activity, and again, as I've shared with many of you, it's been a challenge. And I think you'll hear that from staff tonight, disappointing in a lot of ways, just regarding some of the non-compliance that continues to happen and the challenges that it's posed for staff in trying to enforce that ordinance. That's been really difficult in that regard. So we did do some data points. Again, Matt will touch on those here coming up, just in terms of what we're hearing from complaints in the community, the volume of those, what the complaints are saying, and then also just addressing some of the non-compliance. So we've had a chance to observe activity in the park, and I think the word I just used was just some significant still non-compliance in regard to the ordinance. So tonight's conversation is really centered around staff's updates to you on that front, and then at the end of it, talking through some options for your consideration, and then at the end of it, staff would look for some direction regarding next steps. So with that, I turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Mayor Shack. Thank you, Council. So tonight I'll start with a little bit of a background. My mic on. There we go. Back in November 18th, 2024, the Council adopted revised off-leash dog ordinance language. Then in April 23rd, 2025, staff presented the Minnetonka Off-Leash Dog Strategy and Guidance Plan to the Park Board. On May 19th, 2025, Council directed staff to examine areas 2 and 3 in the south end of Purgatory Park, and we considered soft and hard barriers, and I'll describe that in greater detail throughout my presentation. Natural area protection, the challenges with existing topography, and potential traffic impacts to the park overall. And then on August 25th, 2025, Council directed staff to implement areas 2 and 3, plus an unleashed corridor, also called a trail, unleashed trail between the two areas, and the main parking lot using mapping and signage, what we'd call soft barriers at the time, and evaluate the effectiveness and enforceability of that plan. So here's a map. This is an image of the maps that went up out in the park. So Purgatory Park off-leash areas, the direction was to not overlap with A-quality habitat as described in the Natural Resources Master Plan, to not overlap the significant amount of wetlands out in the park. We had removed areas 1, 4, and 5, and you'll see a figure. I dropped off hard copies. All the figures except for area 4 in the northeast corner are shown, and I'll express that in more detail throughout the presentation. The total area in terms of acreage for areas 2 and 3 was 18.8 acres approximately as mapped in the field, and the off-leash corridor was just over a half mile in length and really varied in length depending on the trail and the opening of the vegetation through that area, but really the idea was to keep that corridor within 20 feet on either side of the main trail expressed in the east side of that wetland there. So the Purgatory Park off-leash area evaluation had a bunch of factors to it. So we wanted to understand overall boundary compliance. Have people generally complied with the on and off-leash rules in the park? We wanted to understand circulation, where people were moving through the park. Is the corridor effectively moving people with off-leash dogs from the main parking area to the southern off-leash areas? And is there non-compliance with the off-leash corridor and the significant primary trails throughout the park? We wanted to understand dog and human conflicts. Have conflicts generally increased or decreased after the ordinance taken effect and the designated areas were established? Working with police, we wanted to understand enforcement. Can public safety staff effectively respond to issues or concerns in the park? And is enforcement achievable with the current layout? And again, we wanted to understand parking. Has parking off Stadola Road in particular changed significantly due to the change in the park rules and the designation of the off-leash areas? So in fall 2025, we paid our engineering consultant to design signs for us, and we hired a local signage production company out of Plymouth. We implemented a preliminary signage suite throughout the park with a variety of signs, 6 different type signs in total. These signs looked at, as best we could, map those off-leash areas. We described the ordinance rules in brief. We tried to map the major parking areas and the major trail intersections. We wanted to identify entry into off-leash areas at regular intervals, key informal primary trail intersections out there. The park is quite large. There are a lot of trails. There's a lot of primary and secondary footpaths through the park, so we really did our best to try to figure out where the best locations for these signs would be. We certainly had some challenges with cardinal directions. So you're looking at the sign, but the sign's oriented north, but you're heading south. Where are you given this map, the size of the park? It was a substantial challenge trying to orient people out there when they were standing at these signs out in the woods to get a sense of exactly where they were and what direction they were heading when they were entering or leaving an on or off leash area. So I wanted to make it clear that it was pretty tricky. It's been pretty tricky to sign this. We have unfortunately received quite a bit of vandalism to the signs out there. There was markering and graffiti on the signs. Our staff was pretty timely in getting out there and removing it when we saw it. We replaced and added additional signs over the last couple months here. Once we saw that we were getting some feedback from public safety, we wanted to roll out some more signs out there, that there weren't quite enough. And then we were, as timely as we could, replacing signs that were vandalized. Signs were pushed over or otherwise removed with a socket set, so we implemented some vandal-proof nuts and bolts out there that require a special tool to remove the signs. But again, we were replacing those as quickly as we could. So we did some trail monitoring out there. We wanted to understand the overall compliance and the general park use. So we did put 2 trail cameras out there. They were implemented at a distance where we could really see the shapes of dogs and people, but we couldn't see people up close. Generally, there was 70% compliance at the Southern Creek Bridge. This is a major intersection in the park off of Stodola Road. When you're looping on the primary trail, you cross that bridge. But lesser compliance up near Area 3, only about 20%, 27% compliance along the primary trail on the Oak Ridge. So that entrance was at the west side of Area 2. We looked at vehicle traffic and did our best to determine whether or not it increased or decreased. So we put down parking counts at the Excelsior Boulevard Park entrance and at the Stodola Ave cul-de-sac park entrance. A no parking zone has not yet been installed in order to examine the impact of the overall dog areas. So we wanted to see these numbers to understand whether or not it made sense to implement a no park area. So overall, the amount of vehicles in each location, Excelsior Boulevard and Stodola, didn't really change all that much. In summer 2025, there was about 250 vehicles a day. Spring 2026, 236 vehicles. And on Stodola, there was about 50 vehicles a day. And then earlier this year, there was about 46, so about the same. And I'm going to turn it over to Captain Rachel Meehan to talk through the reporting system.
All right, thank you. So in June of 2025, the city created a QR code reporting system that provided the residents with a non-emergency way to report off-leash dog concerns and improve our ability to track and respond to the trends we saw. The QR codes are placed in parks throughout the city, and while used at several parks, the usage has been overwhelmingly concentrated at Purgatory Park. Since the implementation, the QR code system generated 142 reports, with 128 of those related to Purgatory Park. Of those reports, there were 24 unique reporting users. Well, we note that 81% of all the reports came from just 3 individuals. The reports that they did do were reviewed carefully and found to be credible, accurate, and consistent with the conditions observed both by our staff during our directed patrols and the trail camera footage. So while a small number of residents generated the majority of the reports, the reporting still reflects real and recurring compliance issues within the park. The most common concerns reported throughout the QR code system were dogs off leash outside the designated leash areas, dog owners failing to pick up waste, vandalism and theft of the park signage, and conflicts between the park users, which included off-leash dogs running up to or interacting with other park users, and negative interactions between individuals using the park with off-leash dogs and those expecting dogs to be leashed. In addition to the QR code reports, the police department reviewed our calls for service in and around Purgatory Park since August 25th, 2025. During that time, there were 146 total calls. We also reviewed calls to Stodola Road and found only 1 parking complaint. Of the 146 calls for service at Purgatory Park, 15 of those were animal related. This could include dog related complaints, but also involves calls regarding injured deer, snapping turtles, and other wildlife concerns. The largest category, 104 of the calls, consisted of our self-initiated directed patrols by our police department staff. The self-initiated directed patrols of our staff were conducted specifically to increase visibility, educate park users, and monitor compliance while also addressing the broader public safety concerns in the park. The rest of the calls included thefts from vehicles, traffic accidents, after-hour park use, and other miscellaneous incidents. From a law enforcement perspective, the most significant challenge that we have found is that the boundaries of the designated off-leash area are not clearly defined. Given the size and layout of Purgatory Park, the signage alone has not proven sufficient to clearly communicate where off-leash activity is permitted, particularly within the corridor area. This has created challenges in both educating park users about the rules and consistently enforcing the ordinance. The sign vandalism and theft over the past several months has further complicated our efforts. Through our conversations with park users while we're at the park, it's clear that many individuals do not fully understand where the designated off-leash area begins and where it ends. This finding is also consistent with the feedback received through the Pause for Park survey. The data demonstrates that noncompliance exists and that concerns being reported and observed are legitimate. At the same time, the information that we've gathered suggests that confusion regarding the boundaries of the designated off-leash area is a significant contributing factor. From our perspective, establishing a clear, visible, and understandable boundary is the most important next step to improve compliance, reduce the conflicts between the park users, and support consistent education and enforcement. We can and will continue directed patrols and education as we have been doing. However, the long-term compliance will be difficult to achieve consistently without clear physical delineation of the designated off-leash area. I'll turn it back to Matt.
So I want to walk you through a variety of options for your consideration tonight. So I'm going to refer to these as options 1, 2, 3, and 4. Option 1, continue the current off-leash area layout. It's just about 24 acres in total. Replace the signs as necessary. Add signs to enhance awareness of the off-leash area boundaries and rules. And continue our education and engaged enforcement. Option 2, enhance the current off-leash area layout. It's about 24 acres again. Install fencing in key locations. I had presented a variety of fencing options throughout our conversations. There's some really key areas where our primary trails do come quite close. Remove brush to open up the corridor in general. Add entry features to the corridor and the off-leash areas, including gateways, trash receptacles to formalize and improve enforcement. The cost of that would be approximately $25,000 back of the envelope. Options 3, eliminate the corridor and establish new fenced off-leash area. This would be just under 15 acres in total. I'm proposing new area 1, which is 4.7 acres. This was shown in previous versions of these concepts. It's just south of the main parking lot. It would cost about $140,000 for over 2,000 linear feet of fencing. And to fully fence area 2, just over 10 acres, for approximately $250,000 for 3,740 feet, and eliminate area 3, just under 9 acres. And finally, option 4, eliminate the corridor and establish a new fenced off-leash area, again about 15 acres in total. This would be area 5, which coincidentally is also 4.7 acres. That's not a mistake. They're both 4.7 as shown on the drawings. This is just west of the main parking lot, so you leave the main parking lot, you cross a creek bridge there, and then there's a heavily wooded area in the northwest side of the park. To fully fence area 2, just over 10 acres for $250,000, and again, eliminate area 3. So again, a map on the left shows the 4 areas that I've just described in those options. Areas 2 and 3 on the south side, area 5 in the northwest corner, and area 1 just south of the main parking lot. Off-leash area 2 is just over 10 acres. It would require to be totally fenced, 3,740 linear feet of fencing. Again, that approximate cost is about $250,000. The challenges out here are significant topography. There's quite a lot of hills going up and down. And a lot of the cost of this fencing is related to the preparation work that would be required to get this fence in. There would be significant amount of potential tree and brush removals to create the space to to create a fence and access in general through this area. And these are conservative numbers. They're on the high end, and these overall numbers were gathered from what Three Rivers has recently paid for similar style fencing at their dog parks. Off-leash area 1, just south of the parking lot, is 4.7 acres. It would require just over 2,000 linear feet of fencing for about $140,000. The challenge here is it's adjacent to high-quality existing natural resources area and key primary trails, as well as nearby residences. And then finally, off-leash area 5 in the northwest corner of the park. Again, 4.7 acres, 2,150 linear feet, about $145,000 in total fencing. It's very heavily brushed in there, a lot of buckthorn, a lot of invasive trees. There's an awkward existing trail network near the creek, and adjacent residencies are quite close by. So again, we would need to review the options for fencing and get a better sense of overall feasibility. We know we would want to expect to protect the existing soils out there. There's high quality topography, high quality natural areas that we need to be thoughtful of. We would need to meander around trees. We certainly would want the fence to avoid significant trees if we were to install a fence. So again, approximately $60 per linear foot would include the posts, the fencing install, and the entry features related to these fenced areas. And again, it's based on Three Rivers prices. There could be additional brush removal, but again, we could meander and sort of field fit that fence as best as possible to eliminate some of the tree removals. And then we could further look into fencing material options to potentially bring that cost down. I've shown these in the past. This is some examples of what Three Rivers installs. It's a fairly unobtrusive fence style. It's kind of rustic. So implementation of options 1 or 2. So walking through what it would take to get these in the ground. Option 1, immediate actions. We could monitor and enhance the park-wide signage system. We would continue to respond to the Dogs and Parks complaint reporting system on the park signage for rapid response and enforcement and track those considerations. We would host educational events out in the park. We could push out on social media these additional changes. Options 2 could start right away in summer, fall of 2026. The items listed above, and some tree and brush removals to improve the off-leash corridor. Closing the existing large trails outside of the off-leash corridor, we could drop some brush and potentially fence off some of those corridors that are very tempting to walk down but aren't quite in the off-leash corridor. And we could install all fencing and off-leash area entry elements, amenities, and features. And then implementation of options 3 or 4. This would take more of a phased approach. So the phase 1 of this implementation could start this summer. We would implement new signage park-wide with the designated off-leash areas as decided upon. We would look at figuring out exactly where we would need to implement these entry features and temporary soft barriers before we got the fence up. We would, again, continue to respond to the Dogs in the Park complaint reporting system. And then we would begin off-leash area fence design, hire a contractor to help dial in those prices a little bit, designed to include tree brush removals, fenced installation standards, revised cost estimates, entry feature design, and wetland buffering. We certainly would need to buffer the wetland in any of these scenarios. And phase 2 of that implementation over the winter and spring, it's best to remove trees in the winter. We do less damage to the soil in that scenario to prepare for eventual fence installation. And then in the spring, when the ground thaws, we would install all the fencing and off-leash area amenities and features. So for enforcement, I'm going to turn it back over to Captain Meehan.
Okay, when talking about enforcement, we recognize that there's always going to be some people that actively resist or ignore the new laws or the new rules. But if the boundaries are very well delineated, no matter what decision is made, the enforcement is considerably easier, as is education. And so we also expect vandalism still, and we'll take further steps to decrease or eliminate that. Education and a visible presence will continue as crucial for building our voluntary compliance. We'll continue our outreach, which includes education, signage, flyers and maps, and in-park engagement. Again, this is considerably easier if we have a delineated area. Right now, it is difficult to explain where the areas are for people if they're not standing in the park. We'll disseminate our information through the city website, the Minnetonka Memo, and other city and police social media platforms. As we have been doing, we'll deploy our extra patrols, including our police staff, hopefully on e-bikes for enhanced mobility and to get further. And then our long-term enforcement will eventually transition into a complaint-based model for sustained and targeted enforcement.
So budgeting considerations, funding is not currently programmed at this moment. We would need to review the capital improvement funding options. And upon council direction, a staff update would be provided in the coming months as necessary. So with that, a few discussion questions. Does council choose to proceed with one of the 4 proposed options? And what enforcement actions, if any, does council prefer moving forward, including the interim of implementation of the options proposed? And I would like to thank you for your time.
Thank you both. Good information. All right, so council, let's start with questions. Any questions for staff? Kimberly?
Do I recall correctly that way back when we were having our discussions of areas, that the area 4 was, we discussed the potentially removal of quite a bit of trees, that it's not the original tree growth, not necessarily high quality trees in there, and that it's so dense in there that it might require quite a bit of tree removal?
Yes, Mayor Shack, Councilmember Wilburn. Area 4 is not shown on this map, but it was in the northeast corner of the park, closest to Excelsior. There is significant brush in there. It is currently considered some of that A-quality habitat, but it's a maple basswood forest. The quality there is in the canopy of those species. The real challenge there is the topography. There's some substantial topography from the parking lot even into that area. There is an old trolley bed that goes through there, so there's some really human-made slopes. And then it slopes, if you drive along Excelsior and look into that forest there are some significant soft, dark slopes with not a lot of ground cover on the ground, so open, exposed soils. It is an available area, but in terms of topography, it would be pretty tough to implement, and I feel like the soils would be degraded quite heavily, quite rapidly.
And just quick follow-up. So you feel like area 5 would be better as far as topography?
Area 5 is better. I've been through there quite a bit. It's hard to tell because of how dense the brush is. There's a lot of invasive elm trees, there's some old apple trees in there, and a ton of buckthorn, large cottonwoods. It would take substantial opening to make that available and comfortable to walk around. You really feel like you're in a tunnel through that area. But it is generally sort of mounded. There are some slopes down to the trail. So we would need to figure out exactly where the fence would go along there, but there are large enough flat areas and some modest topography through there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Paula?
Thank you. I'd just like to follow up on that. That was a good question. So how is area 4 different than 2 or 3? Because you say topographical challenges. There is the site where the old house was, and so there is a flat area there that is even accessible from Excelsior. So I'm just trying to understand what the difference is, say, between that. 'Cause I understand, I was just by there the other day. It's been forestry mowed.
Yes.
So it's kind of cleared, and in that sense is a good thing if it would be a place to put an off-leash dog area because it's been cleared. But so help me understand why the topographical challenges are different there than, say, in the other side of the park.
Great question. So yes, we did do a bunch of brush mowing east of the Red Barn site house.
Yeah.
And it really opened it up. And there are some flat areas in there. But the artificial slope of the trolley line is so steep. And areas 2 and 3 do have significant topography changes, but there are some locations where you can get in and out that you're not necessarily climbing up a slope immediately. We would have to analyze the degree of those slopes, but I know from the parking lot north to Excelsior, you go through a lawn area with our picnic shelter there, and then there is substantial slope. So we would need to think about general slope stabilization and the actual topography there, but it's fairly steep, steeper than 2 and 3 overall.
If you're entering from the parking lot,
if you're entering from the parking
not
lot.
necessarily if you were entering and had parking space around the Red Barn.
True.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Amanda?
Yeah, options 3 and 4, both of them you suggest removing area 3, but option 2 would include area 3. Could you explain why you recommended removing those in the fully fenced options, please?
To fully fence areas 2 and 3 is a substantial amount of fencing, generally speaking. The other challenge with 2 and 3 is that there is a primary trail that comes straight through that area. So we've gotten a lot of non-compliance between those two zones. So if we were to fence those, we would either need to fence them both entirely or just one of them and eliminate the other. So we didn't have this sort of crossing through of the off-leash areas on the primary trail that I think could cause some challenges. The hill is quite steep there. We see a lot of bicyclists turning that corner into low sight lines areas. So to have off-leash area all the way around there would be quite difficult. And just the amount of fencing to do both of those. So certainly worth discussing the sort of the variety in these options. But for now, it just seemed like a ton of fencing on the south side of the park.
Thank you.
Kizzy?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a little different question. Not really talking about the areas as much, but my question is more so about the cameras that's in the park. And I know that Officer Rachel or Sergeant, you said that you can't really see people's faces, but my question is, if we have cameras in the park and people are vandalizing signs, then why aren't we charging these folks? Because to me, that's a criminal offense. And to me, it should be made clear that if you're going to vandalize signs and not follow the rules just like anybody else, then there should be a charge for that.
Great question, thank you. And unfortunately, we captured thousands of images, but we did not see anybody actively vandalizing the signs. There was some nighttime activity, but we didn't end up seeing anybody actively vandalizing the signs, unfortunately, when the cameras were up.
Yeah, and if we had captured that, and if we were to capture somebody doing that, we would absolutely charge them 100%. Yeah, and it happened in various places throughout the park, so there wasn't one specific area, and unfortunately, it's actually happened at a few other parks. So, if we could find the person or people doing it, we absolutely would charge them.
Okay, I just got one more question and follow up with that. And I know that people are really against cameras and everything, but like if you can get tickets for driving speedy and you can see folks for that and you can see people license plates, to me, those same type of level of cameras should be used in the parks to be charging folks for vandalism. And that's just my opinion.
Fair enough. You don't need a response to that. Correct? Okay. All right. I didn't think so. They both sighing a sigh of relief. Okay. Other questions? Any other questions? Paula?
Thank you. Just to clarify and reiterate, I guess, the period that the cameras were up were basically a 10-day period. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, and they were in 2 locations, which may be why things weren't caught on camera. The second thing is just a more question and comment regarding the fencing costs, because obviously that does give one pause. And, the areas we can talk about, the fencing is another. And I just have to say, I am curious that, it seems to me, and I have to wonder if the majority of that cost is in labor. The reason is I brought this up last year in our discussion, and I kind of checked my numbers again this year. And I looked at basic, attractive, high-quality deer fencing that ran about $680 per 100 linear feet, which doesn't include, obviously, the labor. But, unlike traditional fencing, like regular, like our baseball diamonds and chain link, is that it's more flexible and you don't have to disturb the topography as much. And so I'm wondering if you would consider fencing like that, which, just based on my back of the napkin estimates, would mean for 2,000 linear feet, i.e. for example, Area 5, that would be $13,600 plus labor. For Area 2, we're looking at $25,160 plus labor, and those could considerably use. We have a corrections program that we use for a lot of our summer labor. So, that would be, I'm just kind of considering, the idea about fencing as a permanent solution, maybe an interim, to make sure we have compliance even with that. Would that be something that is realistic and possible to do, in your opinion?
Unfortunately, the nature of this fencing project, or potential fencing project, I can't just call backyard resident chain link installer. This was sort of a specialty job. So it seemed like the only precedent cost I could come up with was Three Rivers construction. So certainly there is more research we could do into materials. A lot of that is the labor cost, the inaccessibility of some of these locations, the actual machine to drive these posts into the ground. It's not so much the physical material cost, it's the coordination and the install, the snaking it around trees, not really knowing your final quantity until you're out there installing the site. And really, again, the only precedent I had was Three Rivers. And I have since talked to some other city park managers. For instance, I was down in Chanhassen not too long ago and looked at a similar fence, and he was quoting me similar numbers just off the back of an envelope. This is what I remember it sort of costing. So the unique challenges of accessing this and labor, and again keeping those costs relatively conservative to sort of the high end. Could it come in cheaper? Certainly, but we'd have to study that a little further.
Okay, and yeah, if more temporary snow fencing types, something could be something for an interim while we're kind of studying this, and maybe not full fencing, partial
So Paul,
fencing.
we're keeping it to questions now.
Yep, thanks.
Deb?
Thanks, Rebecca. So my question has to do with, there have been violations. So basically that's just dogs being off leash where they're not supposed to be. My question for the 6-month period that we've been observing there, what kind of actual issues have there been with the off-leash dogs in terms of conflicts, injuries, so on?
As far as I know, there has not been any reported dog bites or dog versus dog. That doesn't mean that they're not happening, but they haven't been reported to us there at the park. There have been complaints of dogs running up to people. There was one of a dog that ran up and either knocked her glasses off and then she stumbled, but someone tripping and falling as a result of the dog. But overall, it has remained fairly consistent with the past.
Paula, go ahead.
Can you discuss, please, the interactions between CSOs? And, when you say interactions and incidents, can you speak to, kind of some of the reported credible, verifiable incidents, either between CSO and resident and other off-leash dogs owners or residents and off-leash dogs owners?
Sure. Our community service officers and our cadets are primarily the people that respond to these and spend the time in the parks. And what they have reported to me is they have sat up above the parking lot, the main parking lot off Excelsior Boulevard, and seen many, many people just open their doors and let the dogs out loose, not ever leashing them until even after they're not at the off-leash areas. When confronted, sometimes they can be argumentative about the rules or about what we have going on. They've also been through the parks. They'll come through on the other side by Stodola, and that area by the bridge has been consistently an area where people are off leash and non-compliant. And so most of those interactions have been education. And so they'll identify the people, and if they have an additional incident, then a citation may be issued at that point. But most of the first time offenses will be just a warning and education on the rules.
And how many have been argumentative? Like how many, what are we looking at for verbal kind of incidents between CSOs and?
Honestly, it's hard for me to tell because it's not noted in their calls. And so from what they've told me, it's probably 20%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so are we ready to kind of, if we can put the screen up with the questions again. So what we're charged with, easy, right? 2 questions. So we've got 4 options, and really the question is what of the 4 options are we looking for? And what enforcement actions, if any, does council prefer moving forward with including in the interim while whatever we choose is implemented? I just want to make a comment and then I'll hand it off to you all about, this is a unique situation, I think. Mike and I were talking this morning. Usually council will pass an ordinance and it will be up to staff to implement the terms of the ordinance. And oftentimes we are not a part of this implementation phase. And I think perhaps that is in reflecting where we've gotten hung up over the past couple of years, because we do have, I just, as a reminder, we have subject matter professionals here who have laid out some recommendations. And, if this were almost any other issue, we probably wouldn't be making the decision. It would be up to staff to make these decisions about implementation. So let's keep that in mind as we discuss this, and that we do have 4 options that were outlined by our expert staff. Kimberly.
I'll go, and I just want to say really quickly too, from our emails, like people are sort of ascribing all sorts of motives to the council, and I think I can safely speak for everyone here that like our primary concern is safety, and then doing our best the best that we can to have the park accessible for all of the multi-uses that it is meant to be used for. So I'm not going to go back over all the discussions we've had and where but I think we're doing our best to get there. I don't think we're there yet, obviously. I think it was always a plan to put up some fencing. Just timing didn't allow for it to go in with winter coming. So, and it just sounds like the corridor is not working. So I'm leaning towards option 4. The cost does give one pause, but it is what it is. I think I think having an area that's sort of separate, so that off leash is going one way and everyone else is going another way, you will have less interactions with off leash here if you're just going a separate direction. So that's where I'm leaning.
Thanks, Kimberly. Patsy.
Yeah, I'm leaning that toward option 4 as well. And I think that this whole trial has proven that the corridor doesn't work, and a lot of the things that we thought would work, that we hoped would work, didn't. And so, like you said, these are professionals that suggested this number 4, and I think that, or all these options, but choosing to fence, it'll be very clear. Here's where you can have the off-leash dogs in a fence. It's easy to enforce any kind of violation. I feel like I would really like to put this to rest, and we've tried lots of things, and they haven't worked. And fencing seems like the only thing that's going to work to me. So I feel very strongly for option 4.
Thank you, Patsy. Anybody? Paula?
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I think we all went in hoping that this would work as is. And you know, it's disappointing, you know, maybe not surprising that it didn't, but still, I think everybody up here was hoping that it would, and we wouldn't have to be faced with this situation. So I also am leaning towards area or option 4. For all the reasons already noted. In addition, I am worried, you know, the other reason about the corridor is that, you know, it just seems like from some of the photos that have been taken is that there's been a lot of degradation. I know Matt didn't speak to that, and I didn't ask about it, but it just seems like it hasn't helped the high value natural resources in the interior. So kind of to Council member, I just gave you a promotion. Kimberly Wilburn's point that, you know, kind of diverting that to different areas of the park away from the interior is a good idea. Obviously, I do have pause about, you know, obviously the financial considerations here when we all have so many other things. So I would really like to lean into researching alternatives, using our corrective labor programs, maybe even phasing so that we prioritize fencing the sides that are facing the interior of the park first. I know, you know, obviously that's not going to help the neighbors. It sounds like there's been a few incidents from the staff report where dogs have gone into neighbors' yards, and there's been some unfortunate negative interactions there. But so yeah, I think option 4, but doing some really hard looking and basically challenging, you know, ourselves to try to be as cost efficient as possible and use every single program, and, you know, not just taking Three Rivers, because this would also bring us much more into alignment with all of the other cities in the metro area, none of which have a unfenced off-leash dog area for these very reasons. So I think it makes eminent sense.
Kizzy.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess for me, fencing in any area to me doesn't really sound like a good idea, but with all of the problems that we've had, we've went through the trial and didn't seem to work, and it's very disappointing to hear some of the things that, you know, Mike has talked to us prior to having this meeting, and then just hearing it even more tonight just is very disappointing and sad that the residents or whoever's using the park just couldn't bring it together or pull it together. But I'm going to go with the recommendation of staff, 3 or 4. I'm open to either or, but I mean, the cost is pretty heavy, and so I guess with the least expensive, so it looks like 4 maybe be least amount of money. So yeah, it's really disappointing that it comes down to this in this beautiful, fine city that we have here.
Thanks, Kizzy. Deb.
So I think I'll probably be a little bit contrarian here. And I think I'm disappointed in so many ways from people on all sides of the issue. It's just very disappointing. And my contrarian view is that 70% of people did comply. Only 30% or 27% didn't comply. There weren't any, you know, terrible events. That said, we have a duty to public safety. I see people shaking their heads in the audience, and you know, I understand that. Personally, it is a community park and preserve, and so the idea of fencing to me is just antithetical to the whole purpose of the park. And I'm very disappointed that there were people in the park that committed crimes and vandalized city property, made it harder for people to follow the rules because we had to take signs down, and didn't follow the rules so that we could prove that people could behave. It is just extremely, I mean, you know, they're making their own bed by doing this. That said, I also think we can fence the whole park, and I don't know that people are going to comply. And so to me, to put up, you know, $200,000 worth of fencing somewhere, where people are, you know, tearing down the signs and not complying, I'm very reluctant. And so, you know, I will go along with whatever my colleagues decide, but I'm kind of contrarian, and I just think it's wrong to fence a community park and preserve, personally. I walked in places where we were going to put fencing. I believe I was with Mr. Kumpka, and I looked at where we were putting fencing, and it just took the nature out of it. And you know, and I really understand that there are people out there that do not like dogs, that have had adverse interactions with dogs, and that's, you know, that's how we get here. I am a little less concerned about erosion and so forth in the corridor and here and there, because most of the corridor wasn't high quality. It's the prairie area that was high quality, and I just wish we could find another solution. And putting things down at the southern end of the park, I'm just not sure how the neighbors on that end of the park are going to be feeling about it. So I actually think that there are no good options, and to me, the worst option is fencing, because the dog owners are already not complying, and it just takes the nature out of the entire park.
Amanda?
Yeah, I mostly agree with Councilmember Calvert on this one. To put in fencing here is going to change the feel of the park for the dog walkers, for non-dog walkers. It will segregate people out. If you're not off-leash, you're not going to go into the off-leash area. So I don't like the fencing idea. That being said, clearly what we've done, we've tried, has not worked. The corridor has not worked. And as our police colleagues said, what we really need is clarity of boundaries. We cannot get clarity of boundaries with signs alone. So I kind of like a hybrid of option 2 and then 3 and 4, where maybe we pick one area to, like say area 2, we sort of enhance that area, remove the corridor, and then fence in area 5, sort of as a phased approach. We start with more of the enhanced option 2, and then as we get funding, then and as we continue to monitor compliance, then we add in fencing along the way. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Amanda. Well, thanks, go ahead, Deb.
I'm so sorry. I really do have concerns about the expense. It's very expensive. And especially if we keep on having vandalism. I'm looking for a compromise, and I have suggested it before, and I'd love to suggest it again, that trying posts with wires with, I think you call it eye bolts, to just, to just try to keep people in line, that you can take it down at different times of year when there's different kind of vegetation that provides a natural barrier, and is a little bit less intrusive and less, you know, it's less noticeable as a fence, especially if you take the wires down, depending on the time of year. So I just want to minimize the impact. I mean, what a lot of people that are pushing for fencing don't understand is the impact on the environment to put in that infrastructure, and it's infrastructure, and it not only fences the dogs in, the wildlife that lives there. It's just very problematic to me, and I don't want to minimize the sympathy that I feel for the people that feel that we need more control over dogs. I don't disagree with that.
We've got 5 minutes, and I would like an opportunity to weigh in. But go ahead, Paula. Take just a brief
I
moment.
just wanted to correct or to comment on one thing. There was not 30%. There's 30% noncompliance in the bridge areas, 73% noncompliance at the trail junction. So that's one thing. There's significant noncompliance happening. In terms of fencing and wildlife, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong on that. I don't believe I am. I think I'm taking from the staff report. Secondly, in terms of impact on wildlife, I think, again, it has been suggested that we do a partial fencing post approach, kind of facing the interior. That is a compromise. And then if there's issues, I agree. It's not ideal to have fencing in a preserve, but it is a preserve, and everybody in the community deserves to be able to use this park without being harassed by dogs. The other option is to completely eliminate off-leash dogs and give them another and designate another park like Mooney Park that can be totally given over and designated an off-leash dog area. There's not that many neighbors around it. There's all sorts of ways. So that is another option to consider if we're considering compromise or other options and we can't find a way to make this work in purgatory.
All right, thank you. I think this is a bummer. I think the whole situation's a real bummer. The thing that is most compelling to me is the position this puts our community service officers and our public safety folks in the sense of without a delineated place that they can point people to, and I'm not going to weigh in on it legally, but my legal mind also says the more confusing it is for people to find the off-leash areas, the more likely that those citations are not enforceable, right? And so it's, the behavior, the human behavior is the most troubling part of this and the position that it puts public safety officers in. And I don't want fences there either, but if I'm hearing that in order to manage this and to assist in the public safety side of it, that the fences need to happen, I have to take that recommendation seriously. I think as a person, I don't use dog parks anymore for a whole host of reasons, but Elm Creek and Minnewaska, which are both Three Rivers parks, which apparently have the fencing that we're looking at. I mean, if you've been to those, the fencing, it's there, but it is not intrusive. They have managed to find a way to integrate it in to the natural features in a way that's unobtrusive for most of it. I mean, obviously the entry areas and some of the less dense areas of wooded, natural features, it's going to stand out more. So I'm less worried about that. I'll be frank, I'm worried about the money, right? This is not programmed in the CIP, and we see the pressure in, our next agenda item with the CIP. And so we're going to have tough decisions to make because I think there's an appetite to keep our levy low this year. And so as we look at the CIP, we have to probably help staff decide where we might be able to fit this $400,000 in. And it pains me to have to say that, knowing where some of our opportunities are. But with that, I have to take the recommendation of staff seriously. I don't have a strong preference between 3 and 4. I think that perhaps it sure seems like option 3 would be easier to implement from, so if it comes to the fact that option 4 with area 5 is just untenable as far as implementation, maybe we want to know that, because I think we don't want to drive prices higher than what we're looking at here. So that's my perspective. I think overall there's some mild consensus on this. we certainly don't have a complete consensus, but it sounds like, did Matt, Mike, do you feel like you have enough direction?
I'll summarize quick. I can't see Matt behind me, but certainly chime in, Matt. Just to summarize, I think to your point, Mayor, hearing consensus on number 4, and what we as staff can do is come back to probably a regular meeting, because I don't know that we have much room in our next study session, but certainly coming back at a regular council meeting, really just to highlight a sense of getting a better cost estimates, because we do hear the cost. That's a concern for everyone on that front. And so we do have some high level estimates, and so we can sharpen and look at different options for fencing and come back with more solid numbers on that. But again, for tonight's purposes, really want to give you a really conservative look at what it could be. Again, you're hearing from staff that it likely won't be that high. And of course, anything that we do, we go out for bid. And so we can bid out a couple different options. So we'll come back with you, I guess what I'm saying is with a more robust approach to implementing option 4, so we can look at, again, kind of better cost estimates, where those formal entry designs would take place, where tree removal, and a better sense of like what tree removal we're looking at, and then that transition. So where we are today, and then really the timing of a transition and how we could enforce during that transition. So coming back with a more robust, if you will, game plan wrapped around option 4.
Great. Sound good, everybody? All right. Thank you. Thank you for your work on this, Matt. Thank you. I know it's a job you did not ask for. I don't think that this was your top on your priority list of being the dog master. All right. So let's move on then to the preliminary 2027 through 2031 capital improvements program review, and Mike's gonna kick us off while we get that set up.
Do you want to just take a 2-minute break if you want?
Yeah,
We'll get it set up.
let's just take a brief break and we'll get that going. Hopefully we don't run into any storm issues. All right, well, let's get back to it. Sure, there's plenty of people here who will let us know if we've got any storm things to worry about. All right, Mike, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you, Mayor and Council. CIP. So tonight, as you know, is our capital improvements program conversation. Do want to acknowledge our staff also sitting over by the window, protecting us from the storms this evening. So thank you. All right, so real quick, I was mentioning to Mayor Schack earlier that tonight, I think as staff, we have 16 slides for the presentation, so we'll try to be efficient in presenting and really making sure we leave enough time for conversation. So tonight's agenda, just frankly up front, is really a policy overview. I'll just touch base on where this policy fits into our planning process, along with our strategic plan. I'll talk just briefly on our capital improvement pressures, and then we'll talk about facility funding, just with our latest news with the sales tax conversation. We'll end with questions and answers. Then we have some discussion item questions at the end. And just with those discussion questions, we'll state them up front as well. That way, just as going into tonight's presentation and conversation for the next hour or so, just keeping these in mind. The first question that we have teed up for you is, does the council have other priorities currently not identified for 2027? As you know, this is a 5-year plan, and we do this forecasting for 5 years. The reality is, when you approve the CIP, what you're approving is really the 2027 expenditures. And so we're asking you, is there anything in 2027 that you're specifically looking for? And then certainly in those out years as well. The second question is, does the council have other feedback regarding the proposed tax levy needed to support identified programming for 2027? In the coming slides, I'll touch on that based on the plan that you have in front of you, again, it is preliminary, that the tax levy required for our capital improvement program is $9,863,700. The third question is, and I'll just tee up first with some context, the city has, as you know, strategically increased the levy for this year in 2026 to prepare for a potential $10 million bond issuance for facility improvements. The follow-up question to that is, does the council support continuing this approach to levy an additional $405,000 in 2027 to then fully fund that potential bond issuance? Then last, does the council support the facility improvement strategy as proposed? We have some slides coming up on that will outline that better for you. And then part of that conversation is, what happens with the community center? So staff will want to hear from you on direction regarding the community center. As you know, we've talked about improvements there for many years. And for Mr. O'Day over there, Kelly and his team, want to know in terms of if there's going to be support for remodeling the community center, plans have to be put in place. Not only just the facility plans themselves, plans and specifications and the bidding, but we already are starting to take reservations for next year in terms of wedding receptions, weddings, other venues that are looking to book the community center. So we just really need to understand from council where you are with that. So that gives direction to staff on the facilities. And then last, does the council support requesting local option sales tax during the legislative session next year? So as you know, we're on the wrong side of that equation this year, and the question is, will that be a legislative priority for next year? Because that will drive some of the decisions for this evening. So with that, a lot of questions there. So again, think about those as we continue through this presentation. This overarching, there's a number of principles in the CIP document, and really if you have your 3-ring binder, those principles are all noted on the front end of your 3-ring binder. I only point out the first one there because that's significant to tonight's conversation, and that is the capital improvement plan will support achievement of the city's long-term strategic priorities. So again, this is where our strategic plan comes into play. More importantly, when we look at 2 of our pillars in our strategic plan, infrastructure and asset management, I'm not going to read through the definition there, you can read that yourself, but really as it relates to the desired outcomes, the 3 desired outcomes that is in the strategic plan related to infrastructure and asset management completely tie into the capital improvement plan. That is, improve reliability and efficiency of utilities and facilities. And so we have information here about utility infrastructure improvements. Safe, quality, well-maintained roadway system. Again, a major portion of the CIP tax levy goes to funding road improvements. And then last, enhance safety, walkability, and connectivity of the trail system. Darren Nelson will walk through a couple of those funds and some of those major projects in the coming year, highlighting our trail system. The other strategic plan relatability is in regards to sustainability, resilience, and natural environment. The desired outcome in our strategic plan is to protect, manage, and enhance the natural environment. And so again, number of items identified in our CIP are directly tied to that outcome. So again, kind of illustrating for you the importance of our strategic planning process and then how we use our strategic planning process in aligning our CIP to those core values. Again, you see this slide before, so real quickly, we are here June 15th, the CIP. Tonight, again, we're talking about our capital improvement funds. That's the darker green X there, and we'll touch on enterprise and special revenue funds. You've also seen this before. I really kind of highlight the 3 areas that I just touched on. I'll start on the right hand or kind of the middle of that slide, which is the capital improvement funds. We have roughly 12 of those, and that's what we're going to walk through here this evening. Total projected costs of our CIP for 2027 is $65.17 million. We'll also touch on some special revenue funds like cable TV and our enterprise funds with water and sewer and environmental. Those are still yet to be determined because a lot of the plan is still being developed, but really understanding tonight with our CIP of that $65 million. This is a graph showing our 10-year levy history. And again, tonight's the CIP, which is that blue box, if you will, for every year. Looking at 2027, as I just noted a few minutes ago, the estimated levy needed for 2027 is $9,863,700. If you look back and compare that to 26, it is more than in 26. So the current CIP levy is $9,363,400. So the levy is being proposed to go up approximately $500,000. But it's really on par with 2025 CIP tax levy of $9,876,000. Even less than the levy in 2024. So there's been some ebbs and flows with our CIP levy over the last number of years, as again, we try to balance between our capital improvement requests and operations. With the orange box, that's the operations. That'll be at another study session. So we'll spend another study session diving into the orange colored box, which is our operations. But again, tonight being that $9,863,700. Just a couple pressures and competing interests. I know we've talked numerous times about these, and this is really kind of prioritizing, and I think that's part of the conversation this evening is where are these pressure points, how are they landing in our CIP, and how do we try to fund all these different needs that we have. Again, with the facility upgrades, I do have a slide coming up, so I'll save my comments for that, but with the facility upgrades, again, the community center, our fire stations, the marsh, Opus, our trail master plan implementation. Again, you'll hear from Darren on some of these fund balances, and with the trail fund, just the pressures within the trail fund and trying to move those projects forward in a timely way will be difficult. We'll talk a little bit on the Cullen Nature Preserve. That has changed from last year's proposal to this year, and so staff will highlight that, just given trying to find a method and a process to fund improvements to that preserve. Next is overall burial costs, and I think I've talked to many of you when we've met one-on-one, just some real pressures with converting overhead power lines to burial. We've seen costs in there just increase exceedingly in the last year, especially as we start planning for Excelsior Boulevard and some other trail projects. Just the pressure of trying to fund those overhead burials to underground, and we'll demonstrate here in a few minutes what the cash flows look like in that fund and how we try to get that accomplished. Certainly at the end of the day, ensuring long-term fund balance stability. So again, we'll go through these funds here in the coming minutes and you get a sense of the funds are doing pretty well. We got a couple where there's pressures, and we'll talk about what those pressures are and some of the options around that. And then just coming off the heels of our last conversation, weaving in costs related to fencing for potential dog areas. So the fund details. So you have your 3-ring binder. Again, we're going to turn to this and we'll walk through this here in a second. Certainly we'll be beginning on the tables section, which is page 9. In our CIP, what this graph really illustrates are all of the funds within our CIP. So when we say the CIP, these are the funds that we're discussing. At the bottom, as I've noted now a couple times, the preliminary 2027 tax levy is estimated at $9,863,700. I've also just noted that the expenditures estimated, and these slides the pages in your book illustrate that $65 million. That represents about 15%. So one thing to think about is with the proposed tax levy of $9,863,000, that's about 15% of the revenues to fund $65 million worth of projects, meaning that we stretch our dollars. Our goal is to really stretch our capital improvement dollars. There's other funding sources, and that's what's illustrated on this page. So for example, the cable TV fund, there are no taxes that fund cable TV. The revenue sources, major revenue sources, are the franchise and PEG fees. Where we do see the tax levy would be in the capital replacement fund, the forestry fund, the park and trail improvement fund, public safety, street improvements, and then technology. Those 6 funds is where our proposed tax levy dollars will help fund those activities. With the other funds noted here, it's largely fees. Again, as I noted with cable TV fund, it's the franchise and PEG fees. There's also a lot of interest earnings in these funds as well. So some of these funds have healthier balances than others. So there's definitely some interest earnings that we rely on with the streets. For example, the municipal state aid fund along with the street improvement fund both have MSA allotments. So that's the municipal state aid dollars that comes from the gas tax. So the city gets a share of our gas tax dollars, for those. And then towards the bottom of that, we have our stormwater, trail expansion, water and sewer utilities. Those are, again, all franchise fees and or user fees or user charges through our utility bills. And then Williston Center has membership fees. So it gives you kind of a sense of the breakdown of where the money comes from. Again, tax dollars representing about 15% of the proposed expenditures. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Darren, Mr. Nelson here. I know we're in study session. It feels like the council chambers. I'm saying Mr. Nelson, but Darren's going to walk us through, starting on page 9, walk us through the funds, and then if we can, Rebecca, we'll just pause, so we'll start with, Darren will start with page 9. When we get to page 12, which is the first fund, they're listed in alphabetical order. So with the cable television fund, we'll just pause after everyone and then ask questions if any of the council has any. So with
That
that,
sounds great.
turn over to Darren.
And to be clear, council, just, we're changing it up a little bit. Rather than going tab by tab, we're gonna go fund by fund. So if you have things noted, try to get those questions in when we're on that fund. That's how we're gonna try to do it. We'll just make sure everybody's questions get
Yes.
addressed one way or another. Darren, go for it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, council members. Good evening. Starting on page 9, Mr. Funk did a great job of introducing kind of where we're at on this end of it. Just want to go through these pie charts really quick on this end of it. This first pie chart here on page 9 is basically just a breakdown of each one of the tabs. So it breaks down that $65 million between all these major category areas, equipment, parks and trails, facilities, those types of things on that end of it and such. So that's just one kind of way to kind of digest or dissect kind of this information on that end of it. On page 10 is our funding source summary. And this one's a little bit unique. There again, it shows this $65 million, but then it breaks it down by our funding source. And to kind of look at that, when you think of funding source, well, you would think of property taxes. Well, property taxes should be in this funding source page. Well, it's not, because those property taxes are part of the funds that are on the screen in front of you, are part of street improvement fund, they're part of technology fund, those types of things. So if you look at, and a great example of this would be under the MSA tab, or the MSA Street Improvements tab, is the Excelsior project along from Williston to 101. That project itself has 6 different funding sources. So there's a street improvement fund, there's a stormwater fund, there's electric franchise fee fund. There's all these different sources of sources within this project that are then accumulated into this page on that end of it. So it's more to do with the sources of the fund types that are in there versus the really detailed area of its interest revenue or its property taxes or its a user fee for a utility fund on that end of it. So it's just a little different way of showing some of that information. If it's beneficial or not, it kind of is what it is at this point, as a different way of showing this information. So, and then finally on page 11 is just the breakdown of the projects by department. As you see, Public Works has about 71% of that. And really how it's determined, the owner of these projects is really who spearheads the project. So there can be recreation, improvements done at a recreation facility, but it's led by Public Works doing that improvement. It'll show up as a Public Works project more so than a recreational facility project on that end of it and such. So that's why they got a little bit bigger proportion of some of those. A good example would be vehicles as well too. So Public Works purchases the vehicles, even though they may be for police or fire or community development or whoever, they'll show up as Public Works because they're the ones spearheading that project to purchase those vehicles on that end of it. So just a little context to what is in front of you on that end of it. And so we'll kind of kick this off a little different format this year, but I thought it was a good idea to try to get council to look at all the projects within each specific fund. To really give you a good overview of what's going on in that fund and to kind of see where the revenues are, where the expenditures across all the projects are, and then kind of where those ending fund balances lie as well too. So our first fund that we're going to look at is the Cable Television Fund. If I get my glasses on here, because these numbers are small. A major source of funding, as Mr. Funk mentioned, is the franchise fees on that. Cable franchise fees, as we all know, have been decreasing over the years. They had stabilized a little bit after COVID. For a couple of years, we saw just a leveling off there. And now it seems like with the fiber going into the different communities across the city, we're seeing a decrease in the franchise fees. I have a gut feeling that's probably directly related to that because it's more opportunity for residents to sign up for other services that are in their area on that end of it and such. And so we're projecting franchise fees to continue to decline for the foreseeable future on that end of it as well too. Hopefully it levels off at some point, but it is a driving factor for the cable franchise or cable fund on that end of it. As far as projects, we got our audio visual equipment and broadcasting projects there, and that's about scheduled for about $480,000 for next year, related to various either PEG related replacement items or other audiovisual equipment throughout the city on that end of it. Kind of the big thing to note there is our ending fund balance in those out years. And we look at 2029, 2030, 2031, we are in the negative on this fund. And so we've been making a concerted effort across both operations and capital, because this is one of those funds that has both, that we're trying to get some of those operating expenditures out of there and over into our general fund. And we did some of that now for 26. We'll have to look again for 27 to make some more efforts to get that in a better spot on that end of it, and really have this fund pay for just the things that it can obviously afford to pay for, but are really truly cable related expenses moving forward. So that's about all I have for the cable fund. If there's any questions or comments there.
Any questions about the cable fund? It's pretty straightforward. All right, on to
All right,
capital
awesome.
replacement.
Sounds good. Next one is the capital replacement fund on page 13. This fund accounts for a lot of our equipment replacements and building facility improvements as well too. And if you notice on the, this is a fund that tax dollars go into, so there's a tax levy line on this fund. For 2027, it's $1,092,000. And there is also below that, there's a transfer in line. And so for 27, we have a projected of $100,000 transfer in, and that's coming from our fund balance from within the general fund that we had excess reserves that we utilize for one-time purchases in the future. And so we've programmed that out, and in 2027, $100,000 is programmed to come in here. And then again in 2029, there's $750,000 programmed to come into this fund. As far as major projects, if you look towards the top of under major building components, MB 27103, in 2029, there's about $1.5 million scheduled for a big project that year, and that's the dehumidification project in Ice Rink Arena A. That's been a project that's been needed for some time on that end of it. We're experiencing lots of breakdowns and lots of costly rentals to replace that, and so that is a bigger project, and that's why you see that transfer in of $750,000 that year. That'll help kind of subside that, and then help in the future build up our balances. But that's one of the bigger projects in our 5-year outlook that is impacting kind of our fund balances there as well. Another note is fleet vehicles in ME 27402. So we have $522,000 scheduled for 2027. In prior years, we had combined fleet vehicles across the entire city. This year, we split them up between public safety and the rest of the city on that end of it. So we have a fleet vehicles project within our public safety fund that we'll see in a few minutes here. We kind of split that up just to isolate those expenditures between public safety and the rest of the city at this point in time. And then another project of note is the very bottom one, the community center improvements. We have $150,000 scheduled there, and I believe that is for I believe it's like chair replacements and those types of things. And I think there's some refrigeration stuff as well too planned for 2027. I should note though that in 26 we have about $100,000 scheduled for, I think it's like carpet replacement, those types of things. That's a project that we'll wait and determine what council decides as far as moving forward, where we wouldn't spend that until a decision is made of when and where we're moving forward with a community center remodel. So I'll keep it to there and turn it over to you, Mayor.
Thanks, Darren. Any questions about the capital replacement fund? All right, I think we're on a roll. So
Mr. Funk had more questions when we were programming, that we're practicing. So he was
I'm
drilling
glad
them.
to hear
Nope.
that. We sharpened it up a little bit.
All right, so the community investment fund is the next one on page 14, and so the community investment fund is, as I recall, is almost like similar to an endowment fund. So it has a principal balance there that we cannot spend, and it grows. A part of it has to keep growing from year to year on that end of it. The nice thing about the interest rates as of late, we've gotten some really good interest earnings compared to the prior decade where we were earning just pennies on the dollar. Now we're actually earning some good dollars, $500,000 a year or so that we can utilize for projects on that end of it and such. And the only really revenue source within this fund is its investment earnings. And so we have about $20 million or so that we're investing in and earning interest revenue on. And so we do have some projects scheduled for 2027. We have had some recent projects that we have paid for with earnings within this fund. If you recall, the property along Minnetonka Boulevard along the creek, we purchased that property last year I think it was. Those were dollars that were dedicated within this fund a decade, or probably more than a decade ago. It was 2009-ish or so. I think those funds were dedicated for. We purchased that property last year. The skate park had some dollars dedicated in the 2026 CIP, along with some additional dollars in the 27 CIP. Currently over at the ice arena in Ice Arena B, we're replacing a refrigeration system at the currently, and that project is being paid for with the community investment fund as well too. So these are all interest earnings coming from that principal balance, and none of it is taxpayer dollars, which is great. So all these projects are beneficial to the future. And so I think that's about all I have for that one.
Council, Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, super helpful to have these, the way you broke these down this year. Really appreciate that. And then just looking at 2028, and maybe we'll get to this later on, do we have allocations for the CIF for 2027 or 2028 and 2029 yet? Are they already allocated, or are they still available?
Currently,
Or is there available interest balance for that?
Great question. Mayor Shack, Councilmember Mealy. At this point in time, I don't believe in 2028 or 2029 we have really capacity for projects in this fund. It is used up. It used up all of its available financing for that time, and probably needs a year or two to recoup where we're at to make these projects that are already dedicated here.
So there aren't interest income in, okay, so I just was wondering.
There is, but it has to go back to repay the need to get these other projects squared away.
Okay,
so.
great, thank you.
Any other questions on this one? Okay. All right.
All right, moving forward. So we got warmed up with some of the easier funds. We'll get into some of the more big construction funds here now. So we're looking at the electric franchise fees fund. And this is on page 15. And so this fund pays for the burial of electrical lines throughout the city on that end of it. This franchise fee came into place back in 2005-ish or something to that nature, and it was when we brought in the natural gas franchise fee back in 2018-ish. We increased the electric franchise fee fund to help with trail expansion, along with increasing a little bit towards the electric burial as well. And so the source of that funding is pretty flat. It's a flat dollar amount on utility bills, and so that funding doesn't necessarily, it increases a little bit as we add housing throughout the city, but it's virtually flat because it's a flat dollar amount that's set by ordinance and not to change on that end of it. So looking at that, so we look at the projects moving forward. We look at, there's a really big one here, the Excelsior Boulevard County Road 3 project, that MSA 27701. So that's estimated to be $3.5 million of electrical burial just in 2027. We have dollars that are dedicated in the 26 CIP for electrical burial as well. And so I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's about $6 million, $6.9 million for, yeah, I think I had that in the report as well too. So $6.9 million for electrical burial along Excelsior Boulevard. So it is, the price of that has gone up substantially. Excel is charging us an arm and a couple legs for that service these days, but we don't really have much of a choice on that either. And there's really limiting what we can bury just with available funds at this point in time. So that is a major part of that cost. That obviously is the same for Gleason Lake Road. I think we have $1 million in here. I think we've gotten updated numbers, and that is substantially more than that as well too. So that is really going to limit what we can do kind of moving forward, and it'll probably be limiting our underground burial and just being to very needed areas at that point in time potentially. So that fund, if you look out, we just have projects through 27 here with our big projects on the docket. We're still negative at the end of, or I guess in 2031 we have a project along Hopkins Crossroad for about $3 million, but that does bring us back down to about a $3 million deficit at that point in time as well. So that's a long ways out in 2031. A lot of things can change between then and now, but literally means that there's going to be a whole lot of burial out of this fund specifically for the next number of years on that end of it. We are paying for burial out of other funds, and I'll note that as we go through this, that the street improvement fund, the trail expansion fund is paying for burial. It's just that one piece is really starting to drive the whole, kind of a lot of the projects these days on that end of it. So.
Do you have a question? Deb?
Deb? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had two questions. First of all, what is the estimated increase from Excel year over year? Like, are we looking at 20, 30, 40, 50% increase in burial costs?
I would have to ask. Phil Olson is here
Just ballpark is
from
fine.
engineering, and he's been working pretty closely with this. So I might ask him to come up and step into this before I step into it, per se.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, we don't have a specific increase that they've given. Every project has been estimated as a standalone project. I would say we've seen what we estimate a project to be rise quite a bit. Some of them are twice as much as we've estimated. But year over year, we don't have an estimate.
Okay, but just on a project for project, it's like gone up to doubled.
Yeah,
what it's
in a
cost
lot of
over the last-
cases. So we're actually going and using our consultants then to just double check those numbers, which we're in the process of doing as well.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Follow-up question then, given this, I don't think that labor costs have changed significantly. I don't know that there's a lot of different materials that they're using that would have cost. Can you account for this cost increase?
A lot of the costs are so specific on the road corridor. So it's what level of transformers do you need for that corridor or wire for that corridor. So I don't know that we have on our end enough history on how to price those out ourselves when we're planning for these things. So
Right.
we're getting the estimates from Excel.
I'm just surprised at the amount of rate increase or the cost increase, fee increase for doing this, and I'm just wondering if this is worth talking to the PUC about, and if anybody has done so. So,
Maybe that's a comment or a note.
sorry,
We
not a
can-
question.
No, that's okay. No, a
I-
reasonable point, I think, but anything to add on that, Mike?
We certainly can talk to the PUC. That it's a private, we can talk to the PUC. We haven't done that yet. I think it's been a surprise as Darren and I have chatted with both Will and Phil and the other team members. Just they do estimates, and so our staff does a really good job estimating. And so we have estimates in our CIP, and then when we're actually getting the cost, the cost proposals from Excel, it's shocking us too because it's not expected. And to what degree we have some control in that or can push back on it, I think very little, but it's something that we still can try to point out to the PUC.
I would also point out that Excel made a record profit last year of $2.4 billion. And so to have these price increases without having a demonstrated need for them, I think that is something we can and should be asking the PUC and maybe connecting with other cities who are also having this issue. So I would just encourage that to happen and happy to help with that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And the other thing I would just add to this too, and I think maybe Darren touched on it, with the under project expenditures, we have the local rehabilitation under Kinzel, so that's coming to the council very soon. And again, just a reminder on this page, this reflects the burial cost generally where we're doing trail improvements. And so where we're doing trail improvements, we're looking to bury those lines. And so that was most of the intent of this fund. And as Darren noted, when this fund was established, it was based on a fixed fee versus like a percentage. And so that revenue source of 1.29 million comes in every year. And the expenditures right now are just outpacing that considerably. And so we're gonna have to look, pretty hard at not only just trying to talk with Excel on what's driving that, but then we probably have to make policy decisions at some point on either looking to raise the franchise fee to cover these increased costs, or we may have to look at not burying. I mean, that is another option, is not doing the burials as part of these trail improvement projects.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Mike, maybe I would just want to piggyback off that, Mike, a little bit, is that Mr. Manchester, Will and I are on the Suburban Rate Authority, and I serve as the treasurer, Will's the expert on that end of it, but we had kind of asked this question when we were seeing these big numbers this spring at our last meeting. And we asked, who's doing burial? And we're just seeing these astronomical price increases, and the room was just quiet. And we're like, nobody can afford to do the burial, and so they're not doing the burial and in the areas that need it. And granted, the different communities are different depending on age and things like that, but it's beneficial for us to get that line buried along those major arterial routes where trails are going in, and it helps with the reliability of the network or the system, and it's their system, and but it's our residents on that end of it. So it was just interesting to see that response when we inquired about those costs. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Phil, for now. You'll probably be back. You're probably the hot seat guy tonight. All right, go ahead.
Moving on to the forestry fund. This is a relatively simple fund on that end of it. It's just one project within this fund. It's the pest, our plant pest program, and really it's dedicated towards our EIB or EAB removal and those types of things. And so we're kind of in that peak time frame. I would assume over the next 3, 4, 5 years that that'll be our peak time. We have a tax levy that's dedicated to this, and obviously we'll then restore our fund balances at that point in time. But we had a good, decent fund balance leading into the EAB stuff or event, and so we're using those dollars along with existing dollars to help fight that infestation on that end of it. So.
Any questions on the forestry? Excuse me. Any questions on the forestry fund? Pretty straightforward, that one. All right.
All right, Municipal State Aid Fund. This is a fund that is funded solely by the state aid that we receive. As Mr. Funk mentioned, a portion of the gas tax comes into this fund, and so it's a lot of projects that have to be MSA eligible type of projects. So there's certain streets, certain areas that are deemed MSA eligible, and so we use those dollars, these dollars for those types of projects. And so obviously a big one in there again is the Excelsior Boulevard project, where you can see $1.3 million is going towards that project in 2027. And I think we have some dollars in 2026 dedicated to that project as well too. So state aid allotments about $2.2 million a year. It has been fairly stable. I don't know that we expect it to increase potentially. I think that we're expecting it to really start to decline a little bit as well too. So those are things that we'll keep an eye on. But as miles per gallon increase, more electric vehicles on the road, those types of things, our gas tax share, and more state aid eligible roads come on the system, our gas tax share will probably likely decline a little bit moving forward into the future. So.
Any questions on this page?
And this fund did have a negative fund balance 3-4 years ago. It had a pretty substantial negative fund balance in there as we were completing projects around the Ridgedale area. But now we've been able to recoup those funds and get it into a good spot to be able to move forward on MSA eligible projects. So.
And no other questions, but I just want to maybe reiterate. So these funds are very restricted in what they can be applied to, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, correct. That was a short answer, but that is correct, because if you look at the balance, we're at 5.8 million, could be up to 9.5 million in 5 years, and so let's just shift that over to the electric franchise, pay for underground burials with that. And you can't on this one. This is very restrictive because of the state aid dollars attached to it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what's unique about government accounting, is that we have all these funds, but we have all these funds because they have a specific purpose. And so, yes, we can do some shifting around it and things like that, but for the most part, we have a fund that's created for a purpose. And so those fund balances in that fund are dedicated for that specific purpose and typically aren't moved around. So.
Go ahead, Paula.
What are the specific uses that are prescribed generally for the electric, or is it that road that's?
It's on the specific road.
Highway, state roads.
Yeah, and there's classifications of roads. It's not necessarily a county road. There can be a city road that is MSA eligible type of road.
Got it.
And I haven't figured it out in 20 years, but they just tell me these are the roads that are MSA eligible, and it's not a lot of like the very residential ones, but it's more the collector city street ones, like maybe like a Williston which isn't a county road, but it's a city road, but I think that would probably be a state aid eligible road. I'm getting a thumbs up even. Look at that.
I knew Phil was
I
going to
think
be
there's
the
a table with
MVP
all of
tonight.
them. I just was wondering what the rhyme or reason was.
Sure.
Thanks.
All right, Park and Trail Improvement Fund.
All right.
So here, this fund has a fairly substantial fund balance in it. At the end of 2031, we're looking at about $5.6 million in remaining fund balance. Currently, we have about $7 million on the books at the beginning of 27 estimated. A major source of revenue for this fund is our property tax levy, along with our park dedication fees. And so, over the last decade, Julie and her team and the rest of the staff have done a great job with development, and we've received lots of park dedication fees that have paid for Ridgedale Commons. We've had lots of development around the Opus area and such like that, and so we have a lot of park dedication fees that are in this fund. I would say a vast majority of these, if not all of these, should really be dedicated towards something in the Opus area because of the park dedication fees that have come in over the last number of years on that end of it and such. And so we're obviously looking to supplant these dollars with, maybe a local sales tax or something of that nature to get that open space area in the Opus area complete at some point in time down the road. But that is a major source of within this fund is that dedication of park dedication fees that have to go towards a regional or a park of significance within the city on that end of it. Some projects in here. We talked about the Cullen Nature Preserve. We've talked about that a little bit, and so we got a phased approach to bringing that into as an active project for 27, beginning in 27, all the way through 2031 at this point in time. So that is a newer project in here. Otherwise, a lot of it is, we actually, when you notice there's fleet vehicles in here, it just caught my eye, but there is a fleet vehicle, and that's really related to probably trail maintenance, snow removal, those types of things on that end of it. So that was a new add to the fleet, and so that came out of the Park and Trail Fund related to that. Other than that, I don't have any other projects to point out, but I would take any questions.
So this might be more for Matt, and Will's not here tonight, but regarding Cullen, and we saw a nice email from the Friends of Cullen, and I spoke with Mike about it a bit today, and I think everybody's glad to see this funding in here. As far as what comes first and how we kind of program the operations, is that something that there's some flexibility on what things we do in which years?
Mayor Shack and Council, thanks for the question. And throughout this whole process, the Friends of Cullen Nature Preserve have been amazingly excellent to work with and thoughtful, certainly from the restoration end. But on this master planning stuff, they've been innovative with their approach. So I just received their sort of outline, but we've had discussions in the past, so I'd have to look closer at the latest stuff they sent, thanks to the team, to get a true sense. But generally, wanting to build as much of the site as possible before we would open it to the public certainly makes a lot of sense. It's certainly a special place. We would need a variety of amenities on site to welcome the public to a site that's under restoration, like Cullen is. But certainly there's financial pressures, so we could talk through what that could look like if we had a certain amount of money each year. But certainly wanting to build as much as possible in advance of opening to the public could make a lot of sense to make sure the restoration is safe as well as the public who accesses the site. So open to discuss and think that through a little more as necessary.
So the most important part is that we've got the money in there, and then we're kind of how we program it specifically can be nimble in some ways. Great. Paula?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Matt for some terrific work trying to get this. You have so many projects to
Great.
try to, kind of figure out a whole park system with 50 plus parks, and this being one of them. But, so I also want to, kind of just wow, I got this email and was able to go over the plans from the Friends of Minnetonka Parks. And first of all, I want to thank them for basically making a $250,000 pledge or contribution. on top of the really thousands of hours that they've already put into, this and our other parks, but especially this preserve, this is, for me, the exact type of partnership that we're looking for, that we've been seeking with private and nonprofit organizations. This is going to potentially fund 30 to 50% of the capital costs for this park. So, huge staff thanks to you, Matt, because you've cultivated that partnership and have been the staff contact for that. So I appreciate that, as well as all of their work on that. So I do hope that there is, some possibility to kind of take this and look at doing that, whatever they call back to front kind of planning, and then, seeing if things can come under budget, in years 1 and 2. And then the other thing that I just saw that I thought was really interesting is the Timberline Park kind of has some dollars available in 2028. And so if need be, hopefully it'll come in at or under budget. But otherwise, I don't know if I would prioritize that over getting Cullen done. So that's my comment on that. Thanks.
Anything else on this page? Great work, everybody. This is the, I don't want to pick favorites, but it is maybe the most exciting to the public as far as fun things to do. So, all right, public safety.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So page 19 is the Public Safety Fund. And so this fund is kind of dedicated to, obviously, as it states, public safety related capital needs on that end of it. So it's a lot of it's the equipment. It started out initially as for our fire department, a lot of our engines and pumpers and ladders and those types of things, because they were so expensive. We tried to plan for those a little bit differently than in our capital replacement fund. But over the years, it's really morphed into all of our public safety is now within this fund for our equipment. We have our tax levy that's dedicated to this. It's about $1.4 million, almost $1.5 million for 27. And then it also has a transfer in as well too. So we're transferring in some of that excess fund balance or surplus that's available in the general fund to this fund for 27 in the amount of $300,000. If you look at our projects, we have some turnout gear in 2027. So that is the fire department's purchase of turnout gear. So all firefighters have 2 sets of turnout gear that are replaced every 5 years, so they can have a set that's in service, and then they can have a backup set, so that if they're at a fire and it needs to be cleaned or repaired or something to that nature, they have a second set available to them and aren't out of service at that point in time. So that is a purchase that happens every 5 years or so. And then, as I mentioned before, with the capital replacement fund, we have our fleet vehicles public safety in this fund. This is where we broke this out in 2027 here. This is mainly related to our squad cars, and then some light duty vehicles within the fire department as well too. I think there's 8 or 9 total vehicles in there for next year on that end of it. You do see that our fund balance is a negative $1.7 million at the end of 27. The actual cash balance is likely, it's hard to say if it will be negative or not, but we have 3 pumpers that we ordered probably 3.5 years ago now, I think it is, or 2.5 or 3.5 years ago, I think, with some public safety. We're going to purchase those with some public safety aid dollars that we got a one-time influx with from the state. And so those trucks have been on order, and I think we're scheduled to get them probably this time next year, I think, somewhere in that ballpark. So we have those funds set aside, so those dollars are encumbered in this fund, and so that $3 million is earning interest. It's all those types of things, and so it's, in reality, we may or may not be at that point, but we don't have a lot of bigger purchases scheduled, so we will recoup those dollars in the out years on that fund to get us back into the positive. And that's really what capital funds are, is that they really ebb and flow. There's ups and downs in them depending upon what is on the schedule for projects, and so different than an operating budget where it's fairly flat. A capital project or capital fund can really ebb and flow and can be really high one year and be low the next year, but we really look and manage it out to the long term and making sure that it's remains viable on that end of it. So with that, I'd be open to any questions.
Deb.
So this section, I did talk to Mr. Funk about it quite a bit this morning, and I guess my question has to do with inflationary pressures on these big ticket items. And, certainly after COVID, there was huge supply chain issues, a huge increase in cost and a basically 4-year wait for, say, a fire truck build out. So now, has any of that subsided? Are we just looking at these sort of astronomical price increases year after year for these big ticket items, or like fire trucks and ladder trucks?
Yeah. Good question, Mayor Shack.
Chief,
Councilmember
come on
Calvert.
up.
I think the chief has got a good answer for that one.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So post-COVID, for a period of time, we were seeing from manufacturers, they were doing roughly 3 to 4 price increases per year, which was pretty unheard of. Those have subsided some, so they're kind of back to that annual price increase. We're seeing that kind of 3 to 4.5% on an annual basis. So they have stabilized some, but they went up so rapidly, so quickly that we're still paying those elevated costs, but they are starting to plateau a little bit more on the inflationary side. But the lead time for the builds are still sitting at about 4 years, which makes it a little more challenging as we try to plan out those replacements.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Any other questions for Chief Fox? No? Okay. Any other notes on here, Darren?
I got
or-
one I should note as the chief was talking there. There is a pumper truck replacement scheduled for 2030. And so knowing that it's a 4-year time frame, that might be something that you might be seeing a CIP amendment for probably sooner rather than later on that, and probably not expecting to order that in 2030 because you're not going to get it until 2034. And so if we want to get that truck in 2030, we might be ordering that well ahead of time on that end of it. But at this point in time, we're not prepaying for anything. We are going to lock in a price, but we're not going to turn over any funds until a vehicle is delivered at this point. So they're not giving discounts enough to offset what our interest earnings are at this point in time. So,
Anything else, Council, on the Public Safety Fund? Good questions on all these so far. Mike?
And just maybe just call on Chief Borg. I think he's sitting over there. There he is. Yeah, I know. I just want to point out also on this fund, this is where we do fund our automated license plate readers, our LPRs. I know that's gotten some attention here with some other neighboring cities and in the media lately. There is a $46,000 cost per year regarding that. It does not show up in our operations. It does show up in our CIP. So I just want to point that out, that's where this is funded through, is this fund. And now if the chief has any, if you have questions for the chief on that.
Question, Paula, go ahead.
Just not on that per se, but just relatedly, if we were to do, and this is something I've kind of been encouraging us to consider, is the traffic camera. If there's a pilot program that we can expand to and be involved in, in addition to, say, Minneapolis and Eagan, and I can't remember the other city that's doing it, would it come out of this fund? I don't know if that's Darren
It's
or Chief.
Jason?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Come on over to the mic,
Okay.
Chief.
Sorry, don't mean to put you on the spot.
To do that, would it come out of this fund?
Yeah, or would it operations? I don't know. Maybe that's a Darren question.
I don't know what the costs are. I mean, I don't know what the ballpark costs are or anything to that nature, but
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
We just wanted to be able to see you, Chief. All right. Anything else on this one? All right. Moving on to Stormwater Fund.
all right. All right. We're to the S's. So we're getting there. So Stormwater Fund is a enterprise fund. So that's run similar to our water and sewer fund as well too. So it's an enterprise. It's theoretically supposed to just stand on its own and pay for its own operations and capital. And so this is a fund that has both operations in it and capital. And so we're looking kind of here at the capital piece. Operations have been forecasted generally at this point in time, so they're not set in stone because we're going to go through our operational budget here later this summer and early fall to get where that's at. But where this fund is sitting at, obviously the big fee generation piece of that is from user fees through a utility bill. There's a fee that is charged to every parcel of property in the city based on the type of parcel, if it's a residential or commercial, various commercial types on that end of it and such. And so when we look at revenue, other revenue sources, there is one new line item that is in here that is new to the Stormwater Fund, is bond proceeds. The Stormwater Fund has not historically bonded for any projects, but there is going to be a need for bonding with the Stormwater Fund as we move into some of these bigger projects, especially the Excelsior project is a big one on that end of it, and some the Kinsel neighborhood is a big pull on that as well too, along with other regulations and other stormwater needs that we're seeing throughout this fund. And so that's part of our, if you remember, our infrastructure asset management plan. Stormwater Fund is a big piece of that, and bonding for this is going to be continued in the future as well too, is to make sure that both current users and future users pay for both the development and the replacement of this stormwater system on that end of it. So as far as projects, obviously the Kinsel neighborhood project, that is a big pull on this fund. So that's $2.8 million for 2027. And then again, the Excelsior Boulevard project is about $3 million or so, and I can't remember offhand if there's dollars in the 26 CIP that are scheduled for it as well. But there again, those two projects are about $6 million, and it brings in about $3.5 million a year in stormwater fees. So obviously we have to lean on our reserves there, and then program that out into the future, making sure that we know where we're at. So, so those are a couple of the bigger projects that are in this fund, and open to questions.
Anybody? Questions on this? Phil's ready. It's gonna come up. Nope. All right.
All right.
Street improvement.
Well, the Street Improvement Fund, page 21, is probably one of our most complex funds. I spend a lot of time with Phil and his staff over there, and trying to make the big puzzle work. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So we try to figure out how to do that. Obviously, our tax levy for our CIPs is a majority of that goes into this fund. We got about $5.8 million of that, $6 million plus, or just about what was our levy? Just about under 10 million, 9.8 million of our total CIP levy. So it's a big portion of our CIP levy that's dedicated to this. We have some MSA maintenance dollars, so there's similar to the state aid allotment dollars. This is just the maintenance portion of it. We have construction dollars as well too that goes into the MSA fund. So we get a little funding source there as well. And then we don't have it in here, but in past years we've transferred funds from our general fund over to this fund as well too, to make sure that it's paying for some of those basic infrastructure needs on that end of it. But if you look at our projects going forward in 27 here, that Kinsel neighborhood again, we've seen that, or touch base on that in other funds. We got about $5.6 million scheduled in 27 for that. And I think there's probably funds in 26 if I brought up my CIP there as well too. So that's a big project. We have the Excelsior Boulevard project, another 1.5, and I know there was funds in 26 for that one. Local street preservation, that's kind of our mill and overlay, are just kind of the general, not minimal maintenance, but it's the just the mill and overlay type stuff that we do in-house, both contracting and in-house. And then we have the noise barrier one too, that's just on here for 1 year. That was a petition to put a noise barrier along 169 where the state pays for a vast majority of it, but we pay for 10 or 20% of it, I believe, or something to that nature. So that's our local share cost there in 2027 as well too. So you can see we have about $12.6 million of projects in 2027, and so that eats up our $5.8 million tax levy pretty quickly on that end of it. And so we're kind of at the point where we can't do these major recon projects every year. We do them kind of every other year or every third year on some of those. Just as we did down the project just down off of Minnetonka Boulevard, where it was a multi-year project on that end of it and such. So, and I should note also is that as we talked about the electric burial piece of that, the Street Improvement Fund is taking on some of those pieces as well too. So I believe in the local street rehab project for Essex, which is LSI 31602, I believe there is underground burial, I believe, in that project as well too. So it's not that we're not doing electric or underground burial outside of that electric fund, but it's within the street improvement fund, within the trail expansion fund that we'll touch on here in a second as well too. So just a couple highlights for the street improvement fund. So
Thanks, Darren. I know those folks on Essex are going to be glad to have that happen, so that was good to see. Any other questions here? All right, Patsy. Yep, go for it.
You know, and I don't know how this all fits in, but so with the local street, with the Kinzel project, that so all of these funds are going toward infrastructure and you know, repairing old, you know, aging water, all that stuff. But also, there, with this, whenever we do street improvements, there's trail. And I wonder if we don't do this trail. I'm thinking about how much of this is put aside for the trail improvements in that area. Like how much?
All right, Phil, come on up. Maybe you can just touch on when we expect to see this and how we would address, because that trail issue is kind of the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, Mayor,
Yes.
Council, for the Kinzel project specifically, we're finalizing the feasibility report and likely bringing that in July and talking about it then. But any trail expansion in that neighborhood would be funded from this fund, in the street improvement fund. It's not part of the trail expansion fund or anything. It'd be included within this number.
Okay, so, and we don't know generally how much that is.
I think it depends on which segment
Right.
it is, which is a little more of the detail.
Right.
But it's all within that same budget that's listed here.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Do you want to add anything to that, Mike?
And yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think Phil said, I'll say it maybe just in some different way of saying it. So that when you look at that number, that 5 million, and again, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, the 5,665,000 that you see there, that's the engineer's estimate for that project, including the trails. And I think, Patsy, what you're asking is, well, how much of that is like for the trails themselves? And I think that we'll have better information in July when the engineers come back with the feasibility study, and we'll be able to break down, I think, the different segments, and you have a better sense of what that cost is. Too difficult probably today to estimate that number, but certainly we'll be bringing that back to you in July, so that way you'll understand really the totality of that project and the scope. Yep.
Any other questions on this one? No? Okay. Technology.
all right, moving on to technology fund. This is a fairly straightforward fund on that end of it. We are seeing lots of increasing costs, just like every other fund on that end of it, but it seems like the technology world is increasing at a very hefty pace as well. We do have a tax levy that's dedicated to this, but we are looking to expand that tax levy over the next 5 years fairly substantially. Right now, we're kind of backfilling it with some transfers in from the general fund from those surplus dollars that are programmed out through the next 5 years, actually, on that end of it as well, too, as we try to transition from those transfers to a tax levy dedicated to our projects in this fund. There aren't a lot of projects, but there are important projects in here as well too. So we have one project is our cybersecurity piece of that. That was a new project that was added last year, and that is ensuring that we are meeting cybersecurity needs there and protecting the city as best we can against any potential cyber attacks and things like that on that end of it. It goes towards, there's office equipment in here, so it's anything from computer replacements, from laptops to servers to anything technology related. Is a lot of it is all in here on that end of it and such. And so a lot of our software applications come out of this fund as well too, and everything's virtual these days, and so there's a lot of annual cost increases on those hosted type of applications and products as well too, even servers and such like that. So that is about all I have on this one. It's a tight fund balance on this one as well too. We do have some dollars in reserve that are encumbered for a future ERP HCM system as well too. So we got about I think it's about $1 million or so that we had as a 26 project that dollars are encumbered in there, and so we're looking to try to start that project later this fall of just starting to gather an RFP request at that point in time, and to start looking at products coming forward at the end of this year towards the beginning of next year on that end of it. So that's in the works as well too as a pending project.
Good. Any questions about technology? I mean, other than everything.
Right.
All right. Trail System Expansion Fund.
All right. So this is our, obviously, as the mayor stated, trail system expansion. And so this is a fund that's dedicated to expanding our trail network. And so this was a concerted effort by the council a number of years ago to try to get, we have the long list of trail needs, try to get some progress made on that list. And so we instituted the franchise fees in 2018 for the natural gas piece of that, and then the increase in the electric at that same point. A lot of those fees are going towards trail expansion, a little other parts going towards the underground burial. And so we got about $2 million a year that's dedicated to trail expansion. And 7-8 years ago, $2 million got us a long ways. Now it gets us a half a project. And so it's really, especially with the projects that we have in place here, with the Excelsior piece of that, along with trail improvement for the 2027 projects at Park 27305 is the Baker Trail, and so that's a Three Rivers Park Trail along Baker Road. The $4.2 million that we have here is for burial of electrical lines under that trail in specific areas. It's not the entire area, but it is certain locations of that where the trail intersects with the utility lines on that end of it. I think total burial was going to be upwards of $7 million plus on that end of it, and just not feasible on a $2 million annual budget on that end of it. So you can see in out years here, we don't have any projects scheduled, but as we've mentioned, going throughout the other funds, the Street Improvement Fund, like specific, there in some Street Improvement Fund is where it has some trail expansion work done as well too. So just like the Kinzel project that Phil talked about, trail expansion would be part of that piece of it. So we're not necessarily stopped doing the trail expansion, we're just doing it in other areas that have some funding available at that point in time. So you can see even without doing any projects over the next 5 years, we're still at a negative fund balance of a substantial dollar amount on that end of it. So we'll need to pull ourselves out of that and kind of go from there and save up as we move forward. So
Any questions on this? Amanda?
Yeah, I have one, I think maybe a clarification for the trail improvement plan, the Park 27305, 4.2 million for that. Did I hear you that is entirely for burial of the Baker Road Trail, or are there other aspects of the trail that are included in that 4.2 million?
yes, Councilmember Maxwell, that is correct. So in your hard copy that you received, there was a typo in there. Initially stated there was a $7 million in there. So there's $4.2 million that's dedicated to that project. $4 million of that is for underground burial, and $200,000 is dedicated to trail expansion with ancillary segments to connect to that trail. So Three Rivers is doing the entire trail itself, but we have certain connections that we want to make to that trail, and so we have $200,000 dedicated to that. I would assume it's probably by the middle school or something to that nature, getting major little points connected to that major trail. So
Okay. I guess for me, the idea of $4 million for burying utilities doesn't really belong in a trail fund, so I just, that seems like a lot to me, so that's why I brought that up.
Yeah, I think the same conundrum that we've been talking about with this one's tricky, I think, on some of the
I think
opting out of burial, right? I mean, that's a tricky
Yeah.
piece.
I think obviously Baker was a major trail on our plan, and so getting that trail done and having Three Rivers pay for it's great on that end of it. So we were just thinking, well, if we were to build that trail, we'd gladly do it for $4 million if we could get it done. So if we're doing, if we can dedicate those dollars towards burial for areas where the lines intersect with the trail, if we can do that and get it done, that would be probably our contribution towards that trail going through our city on that end of it. Ideally, it'd be nice to bury all the lines, but the ones that are in the directly lined path of that trail, it probably need to be done at this point. So, and just trying to find funds in any of our available funds in a fund here again. Obviously, the electric franchise fee fund can't afford the $4 million of it, so trying to find an alternative solution. So this one isn't great, but it's maybe better. But
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Darren just touched on what I was going to say, and that is, we're on page 23, and then if you flip back to page 15, as Darren noted, the electric franchise fee fund, this is where Darren and I have spent some time talking with Phil and the team on these projects because they're connected. And while we said earlier, many of these funds you have to keep separated, we've talked about whether we should combine these, and maybe we will at some point because they are interrelated between the trails and the burial. That's why these two are really connected. And you're right, I think if we were to this is more burial, and if you shifted this expenditure over to page 15, which is that electric franchise fee, that's another $4 million. It's already carrying a negative balance, and it just makes that fund a lot worse. So we're at this point keeping it staged in the trail system expansion fund.
A follow-up question to that, where there was conversation or some review of what would happen if we just didn't bury there. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that would result in a lot more tree loss and pushing the trail closer to the homes on already pretty small kind of setbacks. Is that right?
Yeah, that is, I believe that is correct. I'll want Phil to weigh in on that one since he's more familiar with the topography.
For the trail itself, the poles would have to be relocated. So either they would stay on the same side, change the design of the trail, or they would flip to the other side of the road, which would then require clearing space for not only the poles but the power lines. So it's possible to do, but wasn't necessarily the way we've done trails in the past. So that's why we talked about adding the burial in to keep the trail at least in the same type of feel that we've been doing with our trail projects.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. All right. Anything else on this one? Good questions, everybody.
And Rebecca, the other thing I would add, if you recall, our sales tax ask was for supplementing our trails. And so when you look at the cash flow of this fund, we are anticipating with the sales tax authority, and if there was authority granted by the voters, we were anticipating another $1 million that would go into this fund annually. So we have a question at the end if we want to continue to pursue sales tax, and if the answer to that is yes, then this fund hopefully will write itself better with a more influx of sales tax dollars for our trails.
Great. Thanks, Mike. All right.
all right.
Anything else? All right. We're
All right,
almost there.
yep, 2 to
Utility
go.
fund.
So the utility fund is next, so that's page 24, and that's another enterprise fund. This is our water and sewer utility fund on that end of it. And this one has fairly significant cash balances. At the beginning of 27, we're just about $30 million. Should note that we just issued a $10 million bond here at the end of 25 as well too, so those dollars aren't quite spent yet as well too, so that's helping kind of inflate that number as well. And then if we look down at the revenues, so obviously our user fees, our utility bills that's sent out to commercial and residential customers are a large part of the fees collected on this account. We are looking at another bond issue. Initially, it was scheduled for 2027. That was by our consultant that helped us with our rate study and our infrastructure assessment last year. Probably be able to push that to 2028, and that'll be done in conjunction with that stormwater one that we looked at as well too. I think If we can push that, and maybe interest rates come down a little bit, that'll help us as well too. And cash balances are sufficient enough to be able to delay that by a year or so on that end of it. Looking at projects, here again, we have that Kinsel neighborhood project. Here's the water and sewer related portions of that project, $4.6 million for next year. Excelsior Boulevard project, again, another $4.2 million on that end of it. And then our last year water meter replacement program as well too at $3.5 million. And that initially was, I think that was going to be a 6-year project. I think we've gotten it down into 4 years at this point in time. So we're making really good progress this year. And that'll be beneficial to get that project completed. And then we have some sewer sustainability improvements as well, at about $2.5 million. So we have lots of projects. We have about $16.5 million of projects next year. So you use $22 million of revenues and $16 million of capital outlay. That's a substantial portion of what goes into this fund. It doesn't take into account some of the Met Council operating charges that we see as well too. So we have about $6 million of just pass-through dollars that Met Council charges us as well too. So making sure that we're staying on top of this fund, making sure that rates are doing what they need to do. We did have some substantial rate increases for 2026. We're trying to make sure that our residents are aware of the summer. I'm glad it's raining, so people are not sprinkling as much, but we put out some messaging as well too to be aware of those new rates this year with watering, just to be cognizant that a lot of people are going to be in that third tier this year, which is kind of that highest tier when you get into the heavy irrigation things on that end of it and such. So lots going on here. This is both operations and the capital that happens within this fund. So and you can see that our out years in 2020 and 2031, we have about $22 million of capital or cash balance remaining there, but we would probably be due for another bond issuance at some point along the way there as well too, as we gear up for that. Those infrastructure needs that are coming out in 15 years or so when they kind of hit that peak, 15 to 20 year time frame on that end of it. So lots going on in this fund, so open to questions.
All right, Deb.
Thank you, Rebecca. We got an email from one of my neighbors saying since the city already has a new tax of approximately $140 annual on our sewer water bill for each household, why is there another need to include in the property tax levy? But this has specifically to do with the water and sewer.
Right. Mayor Shack, Councilmember Calvert, the water and sewer fund is funded strictly by user fees. It's not property taxes, it's user fees. Obviously, you can look at a fee versus a tax, but this one is really based off of user fees on that end of it, and you have some control over how much water and you use and those types of things on that end of it. But this is a fee-driven fund specifically. No tax dollars are in
And
this
that's
fund.
precisely why I asked the question. Thank you very much.
Paula.
Question?
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that. Also, bond proceeds. So the $10 million bond, I assume, is being financed via the fees again,
Yes.
not via general tax levy or anything like the property tax levy or anything like that.
Correct. Yeah, bond issuances out of the enterprise funds are paid for by user fees, and so
Right.
we schedule those to be paid for out over the next 20 years.
So
Typically.
some of these increases that we're seeing in our water, bills and our base fees are to help finance these bonds, which will then pay for over time some of our infrastructure improvements that are desperately needed because we have a 60-year-old infrastructure that is nearing the end of its useful life. Is that correct? Am I
Yep, no,
understanding
you
that?
are. No, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. So
Okay.
part of our fee structure is to pay for our debt service, and so
Right.
those bonds come due every year, and so they mature. Typically,
Right.
a 20-year bond we pay for every
And it's
every
spreading
year.
it out. It's spreading those payments
Right.
out so that, it's not just
Right.
us today.
Right.
It's people,
Right.
future residents who are also sharing in the
Yeah.
costs of that.
So current users of the system are getting that benefit, and then a lot of it is pay as you go or pay as you use philosophy on that end. A bond is a pay as you use basically. So you're getting the benefit of that infrastructure being improved at this point in time, and then you pay for that over the next 20 years or so. So there might be future users of the system that'll pay for
Parts of
the
it.
current system and a little bit of the prior system, which every user is in that boat. So.
Right.
where current users are paying for systems that were improved upon years ago as well too, so.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions on this one? Okay,
All right.
last but not least.
Right, absolutely. Wilson Center Fund. So if you look at their beginning cash balance at 2027, they got about $1.4 million. So they have been doing really well the last number of years on that end of it, really recovering from our COVID times of 5-6 years ago on that end of it. Wilson Center pays for a lot of their capital outlay themselves right out of that fund. Again, it's another enterprise fund. It's just like the water and the sewer and the stormwater fund. But a vast majority of the capital outlay is paid for by the Wilson Center. Kelly and his staff keep a close eye on that cash in those capital projects and making sure that he has sufficient room to pay for any capital outlay that's occurring. And so, again, the revenues within that fund are basically membership fees, user fees, rental fees, those types of things that are in there. Tennis court rentals, those types of things on that end of it. Some of the major projects for 27 are major building components, and so he's looking to have rooftop units, RTUs for short, I guess. So 2 of them replaced in 2027, and there again, that shows up as a public works project. That's just because it's led by Public Works and not necessarily, obviously, it's a recreational facility, but the Wilson Center itself is paying for that improvement there. And then the Wilson Center improvements under the recreation area are a lot of exercise equipment, elliptical machines, treadmills, those types of things. And I think there's about $25,000 in there for miscellaneous building repairs that happen to occur from time to time on that end of it. So overall, sitting in a good spot for the current years. In the out years, there are some additional projects in place out there as well too that kind of put a little bit more of a drain on that cash balance, but as Kelly and his staff do, we manage those and watch those as those progress. And so we'll keep an eye on those as the years progress and see where we're at that point in time. So we have no concerns about that fund at this point. So.
All right, questions on this? Pretty straightforward, this one. A little engine that could, right? The Wilson Center. Go ahead, Paula.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations to Kelly and the staff for doing such a great job operating this as a successful enterprise. Much appreciated. Just wanted to clarify, however, when you say that it covers most of its capital funds, does that include like capital improvements like the major facilities, or is that still something that we're needing to fund through the facilities bonding and other ways through the general levy?
Good question, Mayor Shack, Councilmember Romali. In this CIP here, all these funds are on this page, all these funds are funded by, or all these projects are funded by the Wilson Center. If there was a bigger project, if there was a roof replacement and it's $800,000 to replace the tennis center roof, I don't think the Wilson Center is going to be able to financially manage that, and it's in the end it's a community facility, and so we would look to probably have the capital replacement fund, or if down the road, if it's 5-6 years from now, if it's the community investment fund is an option, we look at our different options that are there. But historically, the Wilson Center has paid for a vast majority of it, but from time to time there are some capital improvement projects that are outside of the capacity of the Wilson Center that the city has funded and probably will continue to fund. So.
Great, thanks for that clarification.
Anything else on this one? We're ready to move to our next slide, huh?
Yeah, I think we have 2 left.
All right, here we go.
All right, and if you recall, Council, at our previous study session, back in May, sounds like a year ago, a month ago, Council asked, or staff asked the Council if there's anything that are on your priorities list for upcoming 2027. So we've summarized those here for you. Just to run through this list quickly, fencing for off-leash dog areas, and that was mentioned by Councilmember Romali. Again, that's a CIP item, as noted earlier, that's currently unfunded, and so based on earlier conversation, staff will come back and look at a way to fund the fencing. Currently, it's not included in what we talked about this evening, so we will come back with a proposal on that, as noted earlier with Mr. Kumpkin and others on just the strategy to implement option 4 that was discussed earlier. Also then, Sound in the Park was mentioned. This is by Paula. That was actually approved at the June 8th council meeting. That was in the staff works already, and so that one is off and running, so that one should be taken care of. Mayor Shack mentioned an urban fenced dog park. I know that's being, I think, discussed a little bit right now with the Big Willow master planning. Not sure where that's still in the works. So more to come on if there's going to be any type of other urban dog park outside of Purgatory. And currently that is also unfunded at this time until that's identified. Councilmember Calvert, you brought up safe routes to school. One thing I just want to point out to you, I think on page 66 of our book, we haven't, page 66, I'm going to turn to that quickly. This is a CIP page and the park, trails, and open spaces. A couple years ago, we put staff, we recommend a placeholder. We do have $100,000 a year included in this fund. It's meant for these types of purposes. So if there's a crosswalk identified that needs improvement, whether it's ADA accessibility, upgrades, we have funds available for that. We do have two projects noted for 27 and 28, but again, this is largely not project specific because it's meant to address issues as they arise. So there is some funding available for Safe to Schools, and certainly with the Baker Road Trail project, that will address some of the issues around the Hopkins, was it Middle School West? I think is the right name of that school.
Right. So I've been on the council for 9 years, and I've asked for very little, but that little piece was something that that's really missing. So I'm hoping.
Okay, then with Councilmember Romanley brought up playground usage study. Right now that is not funded, and so if you're looking for that type of activity, we would need to look to fund that, and staff would need more direction from council on that. And then the other item mentioned by Mayor Shack was the Collin Nature Preserve. Again, that was noted earlier that we have a phased-in approach that Mr. Kumpka talked about. So that is currently included. So again, I want to just highlight those quickly for you. Those are the items you brought up, and we have a question coming up that asks beyond that, and if there's anything on this list, staff would need further direction on that. And then facilities. This is my last slide before we get to the questions. And so, as noted, kind of throughout this evening, is with our capital assets, as we all have talked about numerous times, just with the local option sales tax, we did not get that authority this year. So then the question becomes, what are our options, and what perhaps could be the timing of those? So laying out a couple different scenarios. The first column there is partial state bonding. As you know, we did get the $2.5 million for Fire Station 2, and I'll talk about that here in a second. And then the local option sale tax authority. The second column is, again, that partial state bonding of $2.5 million, and then no authority. That's kind of where we are today, so the no authority. And so really there's probably two paths for you to consider, council, and what Darren and I have talked about and what we'd recommend as staff is really what's noted in that first column. And that is to look back or look forward to the state legislature next year to get that sales tax authority, because if without that sales tax authority, then you're looking at that second column. And that's where you're going to really defer to more geo bonding. And that geo bonding would be significant dollars, and we've done some very preliminary runs on what that can mean for increasing taxes to pay for general obligation debt. It's a lot more to the tax base, or more to the property tax ask. And so with that sales tax authority, again, as staff, we would recommend staying committed to that, because that would be your best pass forward from our perspective. And so going through that list real quickly, we do have that fire station. We do have that $2.5 million. We have, I believe, 3 years to spend that. And so we still could go back as a city and ask for a sales tax authority next year without jeopardizing losing that $2.5 million. We could, in the meantime, expend those funds. So we could start with building design and look to get shovel ready. So if we get that authority from the state next legislative session, bring that to the voters next November of 2027, assuming the voters approve a sales tax authority, being ready to go with bidding for a project to start in 2028 in terms of the fire station. Because we did receive $2.5 million in bond dollars, a remodel would be off the table because we did specifically ask for $2.5 million for a new fire station. So we would not be able to utilize those dollars for any type of rebuild. I think our staff and our consultant would recommend a new station over a rebuild, or excuse me, a remodel. Then in regards to Fire Station 3, the Marsh, Opus, and then the trails, all again, we're looking to utilize local option sales tax dollars. And then really with the community center and Wilson Center, those proposed costs, community center at $4 million, with the Wilson Center $6 million, and looking to utilize how we've set up for the $10 million bond issuance, to utilize that $10 million bond issuance towards community center and the Wilson Fitness Center. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So that's just a quick summary of where we're at with those facilities. Again, really, I guess in summary, looking to, again, utilize the local option sales tax as our path forward, which gets us to the questions. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you to facilitate the questions.
All right, so let's take this one question at a time. So question 1 is, does the council have other priorities not currently identified for 2027, and then looking out beyond that 2028 through 2031, so the scope of this CIP? Anybody have anything that they were wishing for that they're not seeing here? Paula?
Thanks. Not specifically. I just wanted to make sure that we're, putting a pin in and going to come back to the whole, how we're going to deal with Cullen. So, I mean, we discussed that briefly, and so I just want to put a marker in that that you talked about, Mayor, being flexible about how he look at the funding and looking at that. So I just want to kind of go on record with that, not something that I want to go forward and discuss necessarily in depth right now. I think this is the time or place, but just to kind of put a marker in it so we can come back to it.
Okay. Anybody else? We're generally satisfied with what we've seen so far. I would note that, seeing several times, that this isn't, we're able to push something out, or we're able to rework, and saw really clear-cut efforts to keep the spending managed on things and evaluating. But just because we said we were going to need this, we don't, or we have some more time. So that was noticed and appreciated. All right, so this is kind of piggybacking. Does the council have other feedback regarding the proposed $9.8 million tax levy needed to support identifying programming for 2027? So again, to stay essentially flat with what we've spent on capital over the course of the last 2 or 3 years prior to 2027. Everybody's, Deb?
Just quickly, year after year, especially when we get to our budget votes, we hear from people as we get close, and usually on the day that we're voting on the levies, that we really need to sharpen our pencils. And in reading through some of the many needs that we have, I just want to thank staff, because there are so many things that they could just ask for. And I do think about public works and the heavy equipment, or public safety and the vehicles and the technology that people need. And we have deferred and deferred and deferred on some of the vehicles, and sometimes it's not a big deal, and we're making do. So I just wanted to make that comment, and I wanted to ask a question, because in talking about that with Mike this morning, he mentioned that there might be a little tweak to the vehicle replacement policy, and I was wondering if you could share just a little bit. I know it's not solidified in any way, but just sort of what the thought was around that, because I think it was a good thought.
Yeah, I'll start off, and I don't know does Phil, do you want to come back, or who's going to answer, or Mike? Sorry. Hey, Mike. So maybe just describe a little bit about our vehicle replacement process and how it works. So, and first off, there is, Mike Kuno, I think everyone knows Mike Kuno, and so with Mike Kuno and then our supervisor over there, Russ, they work on tracking all of our vehicle replacement because there's a detailed spreadsheet behind all of this. Spreadsheets, multiple layers of information, because we track all of our equipment, everything from, I'd say, some of the smallest things like lawnmowers, all the way up to fire trucks and everything in between. And so, tracking our assets, we want to make sure that we're planning for the future replacements. So we do have a replacement schedule. Generally, it's based on years. So for example, a piece of equipment should get replaced every X years. That doesn't make it automatic. What it means is that we look to schedule it, and then we also take a look at its maintenance history. So if it's something we can stretch out 1 year or 2 years further, we're going to try to do that. Conversely, we might replace it sooner too, because if there's ongoing maintenance, it's maybe kind of a lemon type situation where there's just ongoing maintenance. We have those records. So we track parts that go into a vehicle or a piece of equipment. So we want to make sure we're diligent about really what our asks are, because there's a lot of equipment that can be replaced. And so really trying to massage the CIP in a way that recognizes the needs and yet being fiscally prudent and responsible with equipment replacements. And so with that, maybe Mike, do you want to speak more to kind of the approach as well? Did I miss something in that?
No, that was a very good explanation. The replacement schedule acts as more or less a guideline for us. It's really, we lay out the years that we anticipate a vehicle to last, and then, review the mileage, review the maintenance that we've had on it before we really put it in a year for replacement. So, I would say when you look at some of the equipment that we have, it tends to operate in some pretty corrosive environments sometimes. Look at the snow plows that are operating with salt and brine. That is really hard on those vehicles. When you look at police and fire are out there in emergencies when it's icy and snowy, and they're operating in that same environment after we put down salt to get rid of some of that ice. It's tough. And you'll see a line of vehicles or plows waiting to go through the car wash at Public Works at the end of a plow event. So we do our best to try and really maintain them, keep them lasting as long as we can. But it's a pretty tough environment. So I think we look at every vehicle as it comes up and try to make the best decision we can on replacement for it.
Great. Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think I brought that up as well with you this morning, Mike. So I appreciate the kind of explanation and clarification. I know we are already doing it with things like roofs and things like that where we're stretching out. So, I have a 24-year-old roof that was supposed to be replaced probably 10 years ago. And so, I appreciate the fact that we're not just looking at a schedule, but we're also looking at, basically the cost benefit of continuing to repair and maintain versus replace. And, just thanks for doing that, and appreciate the effort, because I know it's they go through a lot. So appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, let's keep going here. The city has strategically increased the levy in 2026 to prepare for a potential $10 million bond issuance for facility improvements. So we've done half of that in 2026. Does the council support continuing this approach to phase in the other half in 2027? And as Mike's slide indicated, depending on our response to number 4, a potential use for that is the community center and then the Williston improvements. Last year, I think we also talked about that also giving us some flexibility on some other things in the event we don't get the sales tax approval. Is that right, Mike?
Correct. You want to?
Yeah, I can chime in. Thank you, Mayor. So that $10 million that we were budgeting for was kind of that step 1 last year in the 2026 levy. So we set aside about $405,000 with the anticipation that we get up to this, about $810,000 would cover the debt service on a $10 million issuance. And so thought was at the time, We had a piece of debt coming off the books as well too, and so we had some savings there. We called a bond early. We had some savings from that we included in kind of a set-aside amount just for some special projects coming up, whether that's the community center, Williston, or if we decided to move forward with a fire station, if we didn't get sales tax or we didn't get the full $5 million of state bonding or whatever that was, you had options whether you wanted to use those dollars for a fire station and or recreation facility improvements on that end of it. Such, obviously, as Mr. Funk mentioned, probably your best course of action is trying to utilize the local option sales tax for that fire station. It's going on the assumption that we're gonna get through it for next year on that end with the legislative session on that side of it, but it does leave it kind of open on that end of it that what happens if you don't get it, but in fingers crossed you kind of move forward and we get that local sales tax next year to really make things happen, because we need that for other areas as well, not just the fire stations, but for trails and things like that as well too. So you have some options. It's just kind of your decision on how you want to proceed with that.
So council, the question is, do we kind of carry forward the decision that we made last year regarding this kind of funding mechanism? I'm seeing a lot of nods. Any dissent?
I'll just say it out loud. I mean, I just think this was a prudent move. Something that, it's just good planning, in my opinion.
Great. Okay. Sounds like we're on board to keep that track. 4, does the council support the facility improvement strategy as proposed? And so that includes improvements for the community center in 2027, and then carrying forward our local option sales tax process and requests during the upcoming legislative session. Amanda.
Yeah, I have a question around that sales tax. Is there any cost to continuing to pursue that, or is that essentially you ask and if you don't get it, you don't get it, but no harm in asking?
Mike?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you for the question, Mayor Shack, Councilmember Maxwell. So the cost, if you will, of asking for sales tax, part of it is just our time as staff, as we talk to our legislators and do our own lobbying, if you will. We do have a lobbyist that we've utilized for many years, and so we do have a cost for a lobbyist, which is $50,000 a year. But regardless of the sales tax, we would have the lobbyist for other issues, and so it's not really specific to the sales tax ask, it's just part of what the scope of work that they do. So hard costs are pretty minimal.
It just dilutes our asking power for other things that we might want to ask, it sounds like, is really the cost.
In essence, correct.
Yeah.
So council, Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's well worth pursuing and considering to pursue because of the facts that sometimes actually repeating your advocacy on a particular bill can be helpful and increase the chances of getting it as you are able to educate legislators and chairs of committees. So I would definitely be in favor of this.
So it looks like there's generally consensus to stay the course. I will say that we've done a lot of talking with legislators, lobbyists coming out of the session, and I don't know what the conversations were, but everybody seems pretty optimistic about the possibility of approval on this for 2027. So fingers crossed we can, carry that ask forward. All right, so we have what we need on this. All right,
So,
Mike,
yeah.
great.
Mike, do we have the community center piece of that?
And everybody was responding, we talked about the community center piece as well.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just
Sorry.
making sure, no, good
Yep.
question, Darren. Okay. Great, all right. Next and final item is July study session topics. And Mike, I'll let you start with that, and then I've got.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mayor. We got to pull it up here. 1 second.
Here, sorry, but that's why you were looking at me, Miranda.
Yeah, will you do it?
Well, as you know, we end every study session with confirming upcoming topics. Thank you. So looking ahead to July, so next study session is July 20th. The main agenda item is our economic improvement plan. Again, we normally would do CIP and EIP the same night, so we split it up. So a lot easier and a lot more manageable. So EIP next month, kind of some subcategories within the EIP will be housing. Again, we call it the all things housing. So Julie and her team will be doing a lot of the presenting. Along with that is developer refinancing policy. There'll be an update on the zoning code rewrite. I think part of that too is some drive-throughs. I think, is it Planning Commission recently, or EDAC talked about, or Sustainability, one of those commissions, both talked about drive-throughs, so we'll have some information back to you on that. Then in August, we have our general fund budget discussion. That's that orange piece of the graph you saw earlier this evening. And then along with that, some more conversation on priority-based budgeting. I can't remember which council member asked me about whether priority-based budgeting kind of works, thank you, Paul, works within the CIP. Priority-based budget is more on operations, so that's where you'll see more of the alignment between the breakdown of how we look at our operations, and that'll be part of August. And then in September, there is no study session. I believe we only have one meeting that month, just how it aligns with other things happening in the calendar. And then October, zoning code rewrite update, comp plan process preview. We do have our 30-minute open time. November is all budgets again, so that's kind of really bring back a lot of the budget conversation and really focusing on our enterprise funds. And then December is a repeat of kind of what we do every year. So that's the upcoming study sessions. Again, council, what we look for as staff. If you have any changes to that, adds to that, we'd want to know that. That's the direction we need from you moving forward.
Thanks, Mike. Council, I have an ask. I don't think it will be a significant time, use of time, but just by way of history, going back to last fall, related specifically to some of the work that Brad started doing relative to gun control issues, high capacity magazines, etc. I think you'll all recall that he did coordinate with a group of other mayors regarding some asks. That kind of, he had some intentions and anticipated putting forth a resolution or a proclamation or something to further the asks regarding some gun control measures. Fast forward, that didn't happen for a lot of reasons and a lot of balls in the air at that time, and it's been kind of on the back burner for the last 6 months as we consider how we're navigating all the other things coming up this year. So I have been engaged in many ways, carrying that torch forward, coordinating with Mayor Fry on some of the lobbying at the Capitol regarding the gun control bill that was out there this session. What I would like to have a conversation about possibly putting forward a resolution dealing with some of these same issues. I think it's prudent that before that show up on a main council agenda, that everybody has an opportunity to weigh in a study session format. And so I would propose taking 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the July study session to have that conversation, if the rest of the council is willing to indulge me on that. So that's my ask. Kimberly, go ahead.
Mine's separate. I talked to Mike about this earlier, and following up, I believe Councilmember Calvert had mentioned potentially discussing accessory dwelling units during our housing discussion, and I just wanted to follow up, maybe get a little bit of history since what the former council, when they set the parameters, what was the decision-making process behind that, on why the parameters were set where they were, and do we want to consider making changes to those? Because even though the zoning code will address whether you need special permitting to get accessory dwelling unit, it doesn't address the parameters for the units themselves.
Paula.
I'd like to circle back to your question, and I am wholeheartedly in favor of having that discussion, so thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. Okay. and to the extent, so anybody else have any input? Either way, I mean, if you prefer, you can also say, hey, put it on your list for December, and that's an option as well.
I'm kind of in that camp. It looks like a big meeting. But, yeah. I mean, everybody else seems willing, so.
I was feeling the same way. That it looks like it's going to be a long meeting, a long session. You know, and I know, you know, I don't know how people feel about adding it to September. Because you know, I would rather add another day instead of another, you know, staying here until 10 o'clock on a, you know what I mean? Like, and the conversation probably won't be 10 to 15 minutes.
Sure.
It'll be longer.
September's kind of out of the question, I think, because we have significant holidays that fall on Mondays in September. So I think that's
Okay.
So that's fine, but I mean, we don't. I mean, I'm willing to hear other people, but I don't think September's an option.
Okay. Maybe August? I don't know. This just seems. Yeah. So, I mean, if we can keep it to 15 minutes, I would totally do it. I mean, it's not something, I would totally do it.
Any? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I mean, you have the October,
That's a big one.
but we still have the 30-minute open time though.
That might be a good time, 30-minute open time.
So we're talking either July or October.
Then I would like to replace the 30-minute open time with that discussion.
Well, I know that me and Mike talked about some housing piece in October as well, so there's supposed to be some more discussion too.
You don't want to waive the 30-minute open time, is what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I think we could talk about, have multiple things there, but I don't want to dismiss what I asked Mike. You know.
Paula, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to point out that we did split the EIP and the CIP. So as opposed to other years where we have gone until 10 o'clock, we are at 5 to 9 right now, having covered 2 topics. And so I don't think it's going to be too much to ask to add an additional time period. You know, we are here doing the people's business. If we have to stay up a little bit late, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so why don't we just do just a simple, are there those of you that would like to talk about this in July, just indicate Paula, myself, Amanda, Kimberly, and Patsy. Okay. All right, so we'll talk about it in July, and we'll do our best. I think Eric and Mike are on it, and to keep it fairly brief, and we'll tie it to some of the work that we've already done. And then regarding the accessory dwelling unit, and maybe this is a question for Julie, is this something that you have anticipated wrapping in? Is this a whole nother topic issue on everything housing?
I'm wondering if we could, it sounds like a history, and Julie, because we're doing a zoning code update, so maybe part of that, could we just do an overview of the history of ADUs, a 5-minute overview of history? Is that, I think that's what.
So the question Kimberly had was, you know, is it worthwhile to have a brief discussion or at least understanding of how did we get to the 1,000 square feet, the, what is it, 30% of the.
Actually just talking about that today. So we have a zoning work group at the end of the month, and I think we can cover that more. By October, we should have it figured out.
Okay. So the question was, should we
Talk about it more.
in July?
No, because you don't want to get outside of what the group is doing. You got to let the zoning work group do what they're doing, and then we'll come back to you in October to see if you are in agreement, and then move on from there.
So, but the reason I brought it up is that the zoning group is the zoning, okay. The zoning group isn't going to make any changes in the parameters of the square footage, et cetera. That would be up to the council. And so I just, with the recent ADU things that we've had, there's just some consideration about, do we want to make any changes to that? And so I was like wanting us to have maybe a little history on how we got to where we are now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry to catch you off guard. Nope, that's okay. We had two things going at the same time. Okay, sounds like we're anything else from anybody? No? Okay, excellent. So, Mike, you're on board with
We're
what
good.
we decided? Okay. Well, with that, we'll be adjourned. Thank you, everybody.